It's a Dave Knight's YouTube channel. We're running a test though.
Hey, hey, raz, dwa, trzy. Oh, I see the pick. So a little bit less. Hey. Hej, 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 raz, dwa, trzy, raz, dwa, trzy, raz, dwa, trzy. Tu. Raz, dwa, trzy, raz, dwa, trzy, hej. Okay, hey, 1, 2, 3, yes.
Okay, welcome to the public part of the DNS Operations Workshop Spring for this year. Thank you all for attending. I'd like to thank our meeting sponsors, first of all, Microsoft and VeriSign for meeting most of the costs of our meeting and catering. Also Dyn and .nz for supporting the social tonight, and also Dyn both for contributing towards the meeting cost and also supplying our webcast team, who have been trying to get here for something like 40 plus hours now, but I'm pleased to say that they did finally survive the Dreamliner experience, and that's why we've delayed the start time to 2:30. But the good news is that we're live and we're webcasting. So I think most of you know me, but I'm Keith Mitchell. I'm OARC president. Chairing the first session this afternoon, we have two members of our program committee, Peter Koch from DNSSEC and Paul Ebersman from Comcast. Just a few reminders. You've got noise-making devices as opposed to the hammers next door, which we're trying to get muted. Please mute them. Remember that we're webcasting, so if you have questions, please wait for Sean or Billy to give you the microphone, identify yourself and your affiliation. We'll have a coffee break in the middle of the afternoon. Coffee will be served in the area outside and also here. and we're hoping to finish sometime between 5:30 and 6 today. There will be a social at 7 p.m., which is at the Brouwermeer, which is literally 5 minutes walk from the hotel. I think we have all our slide decks for this afternoon uploaded, but if you're a speaker and you haven't uploaded your slide deck, then please do so to Indico ASAP, or if that's really too difficult, please email it to me. Also, if you're a speaker in this afternoon session, then please speak to Sean, who will be this afternoon's session chair. I believe with that, we are ready to get started. So I shall hand you over to our session chairs for this afternoon.
Okay, thank you, Keith. As Keith mentioned, this session is brought to you by Peter and Paul. Of course, the speakers. So we may or may not be successful with the hammering. We were informed that that is not the hotel, it's the casino next door. So you're probably witnessing Ocean's 14 in the making. First speaker is Stéphane Bortzmeyer, and Stéphane will give us an update on the work in the IETF related to the domain name system and DNS privacy in particular.
Hello. Thank you. Great, it works. Okay, my name is Stéphane Bortzmeyer. I work for AFNIC, which is the .fr registry. And I'm here to talk about the work which is being done at IETF on the field of DNS privacy. For those who participate actively to the IETF, sorry, because you probably already know this, but the rest of the crowd may be interested. So, context. Many people say, you can read it quite often, that before IETF didn't care about security, about privacy, that this was, the IETF was a world of engineers not caring about political issues, but it's not completely true. IETF already worked on privacy long before Edward Snowden. And the typical example is RFC 6973, which is privacy issues in IETF protocols, something like that, which I highly recommend if you don't know about the problems of privacy and how to solve them. I strongly recommend that you start with this RFC, which has, among many things, a very interesting case study on the privacy of a typical IETF service. In that case, the presence service. That's the thing you use in instant messaging to tell that you are aware, available, etc. A service which is, of course, very privacy unfriendly. So it's an interesting use case for this RFC. But of course, what changed after the Snowden revelation is that before, people were able to deny the problem, to say that no, there is no really a problem, or nobody cares. And now we know that you can no longer deny, you can no longer hide your head in the sand and pretend that there is actually nobody is really spying on us. Don't worry. We know that not only people are spying on us, but they are doing it massively and collect a lot of data. So at not the previous IETF meeting, but the one before in Vancouver in November 2013, IETF made a public statement that it will try to harden the internet against pervasive surveillance and monitoring. There was a speech at the plenary, enthusiastic applause, a press release with a URL here on the slide. So IETF committed itself publicly to do something. What has been done actually since since November 2013? There is a mailing list, not a working group, it's a general mailing list for discussions about pervasive monitoring. It's called PERPAS, and its main goal is to act as a triage. The idea of PERPAS is to receive all the ID about privacy and then to sort them out and to send them to the proper working group or mailing list or thing like that. The statement, the mission statement of Perpass has been documented in an internet draft. Pervasive monitoring is an attack, which is currently in the RFC editor queue in state auth 48, if I'm correct, which means that it will be a RFC quite soon. Also, IETF performed tutorials at the meeting. For instance, at the last IETF meeting in London, I attended the tutorial privacy for engineers because many long-term participants at the IETF know a lot of things about network protocols, but very little about privacy and about what it means. So the tutorial by Hannes Trofning was attended by a lot of persons. Also, an interesting work at the IETF today is to try to do privacy reviews of all protocols. The idea of RFC 6973 is that from now on, every new protocol will need to have some sort of privacy considerations, maybe not always a formal section in the RFC, but at least that privacy issues will be considered in the new protocol. But what should we do about old protocols? Most of them, as you know, are very difficult to fix because there is the installed base. We cannot change what we want, but at least we could document the problem. Remember that at this time, for instance, there is no RFC on the privacy considerations of IP itself. What is the word of an IP address? Is it personal information or not? In what case, etc. All these details about IP addresses have been discussed a lot, but are still not documented in our RFC. So the mailing list IETF privacy, again, not a working group, but an IETF mailing list, started the work of coordinating privacy reviews of all protocols. If you are interested, join the list, review, document, etc., etc. This is the general context. Specifically for the DNS now, which interests most of us, the DNS is an old protocol. It was designed in different times with different requirements. And in practice, it leaks a lot of information. A lot of information could be obtained just by checking at the DNS, and specifically, it enables other actors to have an idea of what's going on. When Alice talks to Bob, if they only use IP addresses end-to-end, to spy on the conversation between Alice and Bob, you need to be somewhere in the past. You need to be one of the network operators. With the DNS, other people who operate the resolvers, the authoritative name servers, may be able to spy as well. Of course, to fix the problem, we have very strong constraints. For instance, many people at the discussion at IETF said that every solution for the DNS privacy issues must take into account constraints like low latency. We need the DNS to be really fast. If we have to do a complete cryptographic negotiation before you can ask a question to a name server, it's a problem. Also, we need reliability because everything relies on the DNS. As you know, introduction of some security measures may sometimes make the protocol more brittle, which wouldn't be a good thing for the case of the DNS. So despite these constraints, work already started inside organizations like Center, which is a European organization of national TLD, to try at least to document the problems with DNS privacy. So what are they? If you look at the actual DNS query on the wire, you can see many things, but two are especially important. First one is who is requesting. You have the source IP address. So as you all know, the status of a source IP address is complicated. And in the case of the DNS, it's even more complicated because typically it's not the IP address of the Alice machine, but the IP address of the resolver, which can be very far away from Alice machine. And also you can see what is requested, typically the queue name. So in some case, it may allow people to know things that they were not able to see before. For instance, there have been many discussions with the HTTP people because in HTTPS, you can hide the communication, but if you do DNS request, which goes somewhere else in the past, you may be able to learn things that were hidden by HTTPS, which is clearly a problem. So what is specially revealing in the queue name? Well, in the queue name, you can have many things. First example, all these examples are real one taken from TCP dump on the .fr name servers. In the first case, you can see requests for the website of a political party, for instance, which is clearly what the European Directive on Data Protection calls sensitive information. Sensitive is something that reveals about political opinion, sexual preference, religion, this sort of thing. The second case, I was very surprised to discover that some BitTorrent software make requests like this one, trying to look SRV of BitTorrent tracker, which is an information that could be interesting for the lawyers of the privacy of the entertainment industry, for instance. The third case is a typical example where local machines are named from the owners, le PC de Pascal, Pascal's computer, and these queries probably were meant to stay on the local network, but in practice, it leaked and reached the .fr name servers. Also, we can have, in the future, we will have QNAME, which could be even more revealing. For instance, the DNS working group in IETF is working on extending DNS to things like PGP keys, for instance. On the current draft, put the PGP keys in a domain name which starts with the email address of the user, something which is highly personal information. So just by, of course, not all QNAMEs are revealing. If you see that someone is asking for www.googleanalytics.com, it doesn't reveal a lot because everyone makes DNS requests for googleanalytics.com. But many other requests are more touchy. Who can listen? Of course, name servers can listen. RFC 6973 developed a complete terminology to talk about privacy and about who can do things. So they have a word for that, it's enabler. Enabler is a party which is not in the path between Alice and Bob, but still has a legitimate role in the conversation between Alice and Bob, and therefore can learn a lot about what are they doing. And of course, you have not only the name server administrator, but you can have also third parties sniffing the cable and getting the information. So we need solution if we want to solve, or at least to decrease the problem. We need solution on the wire, on the server, because unfortunately, not all the administrators of web server of name servers, sorry, are nice people. I am, but not everybody is. So in practice, technically, you have two quite different cases. In the first case, it's the client machine with the resolver. In that case, there is no caching to protect you. Caching gives some sort of protection because you only have the first request. But client machine typically don't cache, so they send requests, a lot of requests to the resolvers. But on the other hand, you talk to a few resolvers only, so you may have solutions that don't scale well, that work only with a few parties. On the contrary, when the resolver talks to the authoritative name server, you have some protection provided by caching in the resolver. The authoritative name servers don't see all the traffic, only things that were not in the cache. But of course, because there are many, many authoritative name servers, any solution in that space will need scalability. So for instance, you cannot configure TC keys between every resolver and every authoritative name servers on the planet. It's not realistic. So in RFC 6973, there is the idea that to improve privacy, you need to act in two directions. The first one is to send as little data as possible. And the second one is to encrypt it. Encryption protects you against the snoopers, against the people who run a sniffer on the cable. And minimizing the data, sending as little data as possible, protects you partially against the administrator of the servers. For instance, people who give data to Prism or similar programs. So that are the general problem. Now what IETF did about it, first, a mailing list, a dedicated mailing list was set up. At the beginning, there have been discussion in per pass. Then it moved to DNS OARC. then to a dedicated mailing list, DNS privacy. So if you are interested by the problem, if you want to contribute, if you want to say intelligent things, I ask you to join the DNS privacy mailing list, which is currently a low traffic list. And you can say a lot about things like the problem statement. There are many internet drafts to read. I don't know, well, 10, something like that. We had also one physical meeting of DNSSEC and one both in London at the last IETF meeting in March to discuss physically this. There is no running code yet. As far as I know, only one of the possible solutions have been implemented. It's DNS over TLS over TCP, but we will have another talk about it. Today, there is no working group on this, and no official, working group internet draft, only individual contribution. For those who don't know the IETF, anyone can post an internet draft. It has no special value. You can, if you have an ID, you write a draft, you post it, and it doesn't mean that the IETF is will try to make it an RFC. It depends on whether it's a good idea or not. So problem statement first. Well, that's a draft I wrote. If I put my name in the draft, it's not because I want to enhance my personal reputation on the network. It's simply the convention in the IETF. When it's an official draft of a working group, there is the name of the working group in the draft. And when it is an individual contribution, the second label in the name of the draft is often the name of the author. So this draft is about problem statement. It does not give any solution. It does not say that we need to find a solution or which one. It just documents the issue. You can see it as DNS privacy consideration. So in my opinion, that's first document. We need to document the problem before solving it. Makes sense. So if you have idea about it or criticism or any problem, please read, comment, etc. On comment, please comment on IETF mailing list, because comments that are made in the lobby of OARC meeting are interesting, but they cannot be processed by the IETF. Solutions now. Two solutions. Remember what I said, that send as little data as possible and encrypt it. To minimize the amount of data, there is a possible solution, which is to minimize the queue name. All the DNS today work by sending the full queue name up to the root name server, the authoritative name servers. It's not really necessary. You could only send a request for the NS of the next domain and then send less data to the authoritative name server. This is called queue name minimization. So for instance, instead of sending to the root www.example.com A, you would send nsexample.com. No, in the case of the root, ns.com simply. It's a good thing about it is that, in my opinion, it's conformant with RFC, which means it's not a protocol change. It could be deployed immediately. There have been some discussion with the implementers, but no running code yet. This is documented in this draft at the end. As before, opinions, remarks, etc. are welcome. Of course, because it will mean less data in the authoritative name servers, that's the point. It means that files like, for instance, DITL capture will have less information, which is certainly a problem for the researcher who use OARC infrastructure, but it's privacy that we are after. So if we want to improve privacy, it will be a problem for researchers, no doubt about it. Second solution, encrypting the data to protect against third-party sniffers. So there have been many proposals. I believe that this slide is more or less complete, but I'm not absolutely sure. Maybe I missed one or two proposals. First one was completely outside IETF. It's the idea of using DNS curve or DNS script. DNS curve is to communicate between the resolver and the authoritative name server. DNS script is focused on stub resolver to resolver. DNS script, for instance, is promoted by OpenDNS, which suggests to use it to authenticate the OpenDNS resolver. Of course, there is a general solution to IPsec, but as far as I know, nobody is seriously suggesting to use it for the DNS. We have one draft confidential DNS. It's a new protocol. Well, it's a new protocol to encrypt the DNS data. On the other side, the last two proposals, starting TLS over DNS and DNS over DTLS, relies on existing security protocols. Ordinary TLS in the first case, and DTLS, which is datagram TLS, for the second. So the first one, starting TLS over DNS, is based on the idea that we will use TCP more and more for the DNS for various reasons, such as amplification attacks. So if we use TCP with persistent connection, why not simply adding TLS on it, and then we solve also the problem of privacy. This solution has the good thing that it is already implemented, and a lot of data is available in the technical report where the URL is here. The last one, DNS over DTLS, is the last which has been documented. I've read the draft. So basically, for those who don't know, DTLS is TLS with a few modifications to make it suitable for datagram communication like WebRTC, for instance. So, conclusion. As there have been very little discussion. The mailing list DNS privacy is quite quiet. Not a lot of enthusiasm, not a lot of opposition. So today, what can say that, well, nothing seems moving very fast in the IETF. So changing the DNS is hard. We all know that because a lot of things depend on it. The natural slope is to do nothing. But if we do nothing, there is a risk that other people will raise FUD about issues of DNS privacy, will propose other protocols which are untested and will create more problems. So I really believe that we, DNS professionals, should work to improve today the situation of DNS privacy. End of the blurb. Now, any questions? Or criticism, or remarks, or strong oppositions?
So we should have two floating mics. There's Shane in the front.
Hi, Stéphane. So I apologize for not being on the list. I'm very interested in this topic, though. So do you think the lack of enthusiasm, it seems to me it probably comes because it doesn't really fit anyone's business model, right? No one has to pay for lack of privacy, and no one's going to get rich if they throw privacy sauce onto the DNS, right?
This is something that is often said. For instance, at the tutorial at the London meeting, the general tutorial on privacy in internet protocols, one of the attendants said that there are legitimate business case for snooping, and unknown on the other side. Yeah, it's true. It's true, but in my opinion, the risk is if we don't do something, there is a risk of backlash. People, for instance, giving in with the DNS, or using something else new on unproven techniques. I already know that some people are pushing for that, saying that the DNS is bad because of privacy issues. IETF will not fix it. Therefore, we have to switch some sort of new, untested, unproven DHT, for instance. In my opinion, this is a business case for doing something for DNS privacy. It's to avoid problem. Now, speaking with my AFNIC hat on, I can say that having a lot of data when you manage an authoritative name server is nice for the research point of view, but it's also a responsibility. And I would be very happy to move part of this responsibility to somewhere else.
Okay, I have another quick comment. Hopefully it's all right. It's about, you talked a little bit about how the resolvers hide data from you, basically. And I guess I'd like to suggest that this is only ever a problem because an attacker can always do things to bypass the cache if they want to. So it doesn't actually provide any privacy that you can count on, but it blocks possibly useful information as well. So
it depends on where the attacker is. The important thing about the DNS is that it enables new parties to be attacker, well, RFC 6973 use the word attacker in a more restrictive meaning. But for instance, when you manage an authoritative name server for a TLD, you see a lot of data, and without caching in the resolvers, you would see much more data. So in one way, caching in the resolver protects the end users against the authoritative name servers. But of course, not against someone who spies a little. You have many different attackers on many different places where an attack can take place. That's the reason why we need several solutions.
Yeah, I guess I just question that as a general statement, because an attacker who controls an authoritative server can often induce end resolvers, stub resolvers to query specific names, right? Which again removes any protection they might have from the resolvers.
Yeah, but it can do many things, but there is not only black and white. There are not only nice guys and very ugly guys. There are a lot of people in between who abide by the law, but if they have the data, they will use it.
Right.
But will not engage in tricks to get more data.
True.
So that's the problem is more a continuum of problems.
So Warren Kamari, Google. Two things. First, on the QNAME minimization thing. Something that you didn't mention is that it does potentially end up being somewhat more queries. Because you don't know where a zone cut is, you have to query for each label. So if you have multiple labels or apexes on one machine. The other thing is something that we need to keep in mind for doing encryption from the resolver to the auth is an attacker can potentially still work out what the person was querying for just by seeing where the recursive resolver connects to. If where the recursive is connecting to is a auth server that only hosts one zone or a very small number of zones, you can make a very good educated guess and do timing analysis to see, this query came in a millisecond later, somebody hit the name servers for AA.com. Chances are they're looking up LARC. Actually, AA turns out to be a bad example because Cloudflare does their DNS, but you know what I mean.
So for the first case, for QNAME minimization, well, in practice, in most zones, there is a zone cut at every level, not in ARPA, for instance, but in most zones, it makes no difference. And also, if you are validating resolvers, you have to do this work anyway, because you have to know where the DS and DNS key will be found. So if we assume that everyone will do DNSSEC in the next few years, then it's not a big deal. If you are a resolver without any DNSSEC ability, of course, yes, it means more work. But the entire idea is based on the idea that everyone will do DNSSEC, so which may be optimistic, of course. Now, for the risk of finding the domain name from the servers that you ask, today there are much more domains than name servers, because in practice there is a lot of concentration. I believe in .fr we have 2.8 million domains and only a few dozens of thousands of name servers. So in practice it provides some protection, but basically it's also a trade-off, because if you have a big concentration, many domains on name server, then the manager of this name server can get a lot of data. If you have, on the contrary, everyone managing his own authoritative name server, then they will get less data, but a third-party snooper will be able to infer more things. So it's general problems that have no simple solution. It depends on whether you are afraid of the manager of the name server, of the DNS hoster, or if you are afraid of third-party snooper. That's a difficult question which is not addressed by any of the current draft today. But remember, a general rule of privacy, privacy is not black and white. As soon as you do something on the internet, you give information. It's not possible to have zero leak. What we can do is to try to decrease the leak, but of course not to completely fix it, because to fix it, the only solution is to move to a basement without any connectivity, and then there will be no problem. Remember to shield the basement against electromagnetic leak too.
Yeah, neither of those were objections. They were just, observations.
Thanks, Warren. Hi, Jeff Schmidt. So thank you. I apologize, I haven't read the RFCs or the drafts, so if this is covered in there, I'm sorry. One of the things that we found in the collisions work and folks that have looked at the diddle data is the amount of information that can be gleaned by aggregation of DNS queries is surprising. So when you're looking at privacy issues, the slides seemed like it was very query by query oriented, but I would also encourage you to consider the aggregation risks as well. What you can tell by looking at a pile of queries is very different than what you can tell by looking at a single query. And in many cases, it's very, very interesting and surprising.
It's not surprising for the people who attend the OARC workshops, because at every OARC workshop, there is at least one talk of someone who managed to extract a lot of data from DNS observation, typically when you want to point out malware or things like that. So you can get a lot of information. I believe that people who come to OARC workshops already know that Big Brother is really powerful.
So last question from Joe before we proceed to the next presentation.
It's Joe Abley Dine. So I just thought I'd mention, because it wasn't on your list, during the London IETF, Joao, Roy Aarons, and I put together a proposal which basically maps Tor, the approach used in onion routing, onto the DNS, which is not a complete proposal, but it has the nice characteristics that it does not require DNSSEC, doesn't require any protocol changes to the authority server or to the client. So that may be something else worth looking at.
Yeah, sorry for not mentioning it. It's probably because it didn't fit in my my table of contents. But yeah, it's not really encryption. It's not really data minimization. It's a way to make observation more difficult.
It's a way of separating the query from the identity of the host that's making the query. So there's no station that has both sets of information.
I'm sorry. I think we need to move on because we're running over time a bit. Maybe we can keep these questions to the upcoming break. So next speaker, thank you, Stéphane, to start with. And next speaker is John Heidemann, who will introduce himself and his talk.
Hi, so I'm John Heidemann. I'm going to be talking. So Stéphane's talk was great because it sets up this talk, which is about one possible solution if I don't fall off the little small space up here. This is joint work with a number of people, some students at USC, and Dwayne Wessels, who is out there somewhere, if he's not asleep. Okay. Anyway, so I'm going to be talking about T-DNS, which is looking at putting DNS over TCP and TLS. And so if there's one thing I want to take away from this talk, it's that we, as a community, should not fear connections for DNS. And so I'll give you some reasons why, but that's something I hope you'll think about. So if we think about DNS, it goes back a long way, and it's this classic request response protocol, right? You ask for a name, and I give you an IP address, right? We all know how this works, and this is perfect for UDP, and because it's perfect, you got to send your request, you get your reply. And so we, of course, know that TCP is there. It's in the specs. It's always been in the specs. And of course, we all know it's just there for zone transfers. Oh, by the way, you can fail over to it but we don't really want to do that, okay? And so this observation, oops, why do I lost some kind of animation. Anyway, this observation has turned into this fear of TCP because, of course, we all know TCP is horribly, horribly slow because, my goodness, you have to set up a connection. And we all know that TCP is going to kill all of our servers because, oh, my goodness, we've got state, and we don't want state. And the community consensus has been that you don't use TCP, period, right? And we work really hard to make that possible. And this consensus is merged into orthodoxy, or if you prefer, it's turned into dogma. And so what I'd like to do is cause you to question that dogma, perhaps. Okay, so the contributions of our work are threefold. We have some analysis that hopefully causes you to question that dogma. To get there, we have some implementation choices that, of course, nobody's looked at because nobody would be stupid enough to do this. And we have one small protocol tweak to turn on TLS over DNS that I'll talk about. And the system that we're talking about we call T-DNS, T for, I don't know, it's sort of a T star, right, for TCP and TLS. Okay, so let me tell you about why this is, although I think Stéphane already hopefully mentioned this, the privacy aspects. Although I think we need to think, T-DNS is about more than just privacy, and I'll tell you about denial of service and some limits that we've dealt with as well. But the privacy is pretty clear, and I think on the European continent, recently. Some of you may have been familiar with Turkey, where all the Turks were spray painting on their walls the Google public DNS, because that was how you could get Twitter until they figured out how to hack routing. But you know, for a week there, this was really good, right? Although we don't like graffiti, right? But whatever. And the other thing I would point out, you know, one of the comments or discussions in Stéphane's talk was, you know, no, Warren's comment was, well, you can figure out who they're talking to because you can see their IPs. I mean, yeah, today mostly DNS is about looking up IPs. I hope in the future DNS is going to be about more than just IPs. It's going to be about looking up certificates or spam. It's already used for anti-spam or all sorts of things. So I think we have to think about keeping that information private as well. Okay, so that's the privacy story, but Stéphane already told you all about privacy. I want to tell you about two other things you might care about. So one is denial of service. So you're all familiar with the DNS amplification attacks, where people take a 60-byte query and turn it into a 3-kilobyte pummeling of some poor guy out there, some poor host out in the internet. So hopefully we've all solved that with rate limiting now. But in general, we'd like to deal better with denial of service attacks. And TCP has well understood techniques to deal with denial of service attacks. And I want to be a little careful here. When I say denial of service attacks, we have to think about two causes. One is denial of service where we are the agent and used to pummel other people, where that's a DNS amplification attack. The other is a denial of service attack on our infrastructure itself. And we want to deal with both of those. But the good news is the TCP people have been at this for quite a while because they run these web servers that actually make money, more money than we make. But anyway, so there's good ways to deal with denial of service. And I think shifting to TCP will help. The final thing I want to ask us to think about is that I think it's time for us to get over UDP. UDP has crept its way pervasively through a lot of policy decisions, starting with how many root name servers should there be. Well, it turns out with the hacks about how we encode things in DNS, well, the right number is the number that we got, right? And this continues where just last month people were arguing about how big the DNSSEC security keys should be. Should they be 248-bit keys? Oh my goodness, no, because that will explode the UDP packet size limits and we'll start fragmenting packets. This is insane. We can't be arguing, we can't be making fundamental policy decisions like this on the basis of UDP packet size limits. And so I'd like to get us to thinking about alternatives that let us separate these two issues. Okay, I do need a little digression. So there is DNSSEC, which is really cool. DNSSEC is really cool for making it clear that when you get a query back, it means what it says, that the originator of that query signed it. That's not what I'm talking about in this talk. In this talk, this is about privacy of the query and not about authenticity of the results. And so those are two separate problems with two separate solutions. Okay, so DNSSEC does not solve the problems I'm talking about. Okay, so let me tell you briefly about how we propose to do this. And I want to walk through this in reverse order. So I'm going to start by talking about the protocol tweak. Okay, so in general, our protocol changes are, we try to do minimal changes using existing IETF mechanisms. And the bottom line is we want to be as boring as possible because, I don't know, we're boring people or something. But the implications of this are we want to reuse TLS to get encryption on the connection. We want to use a start TLS-like approach, just like a bunch of other protocols. And really, the innovation that we have to offer is a very careful look at some implementation choices you have to make to get good performance here. So I'll tell you about how this works. But let's talk briefly to digress about how start TLS works. So I'm going to tell you about SMTP because, you know, we should know about something other than DNS, I guess. SMTP is this nice text chatty protocol where you open up the connection and you say hello, and then eventually you give them your email message down here at the bottom. Where's my cursor? Do I have a cursor? There's my cursor. You give them the email message down at the bottom. And so the problem is your email message is sent in clear text, and some people don't like sending their email messages in clear text. So a long time ago, people realized we could use TLS to secure this. And so you stick this start TLS thing in the middle, where you start your SMTP connection, you upgrade it to TLS, and then you redo the parts because now you can trust them, and you send your stuff. And the neat thing is, the prologue is in the clear because it has to be for backwards compatibility. we do this little transition zone in the middle, and then everything down here at the bottom is encrypted, and so it's private. It's immune to snooping. Okay, so that's how SMTP works, and this isn't just SMTP. We do exactly the same thing for 6 or 7 other protocols, some of which you may be running right now if you're running Jabber. I hope you're running it right now. Anyway, so we have a draft RFC that talks about tweaking DNS to do exactly the same kind of idea, right? You open the TCP connection, you do a little bit of upgrade magic to switch to TLS, and then the stuff at the bottom is all encrypted, right? So just like before. And the only reason we have to do a new ID is because DNS is this custom little gem of a protocol, and it's not text-based like all the other protocols that IETF has applied to start TLS to. Okay, there are pros and cons to the particular choices we make. You can dither about them if you want. From our point of view, it's a good thing that we don't use a new port, because you don't have to open up a new port. It doesn't cause an extra RTT, though. Okay, so that's the protocol tweak we want to make. Let me tell you about the implementation choices that are important if you want this to not perform like a dog. So the big deal is because nobody's saying use TCP for real work, except for zone transfers. Of course, nobody optimized their implementations to deal with TCP for lots of queries. And so, of course, there were some things that need to be tweaked. And so I'm going to tell you about those. The big deal is reusing connections and then getting the most out of the connection that you have. So let me go back and look at the protocol flow. Takes a round trip to open up TCP, takes a round trip to negotiate TLS. Oh, I have my cursor here. Takes a round trip to negotiate TLS. TLS takes a couple of round trips to swap the encryption keys, and then finally you do your query, which is the actual work at the bottom. So what we'd like to do is minimize the pain of all this stuff at the top. Okay, so the first and most important idea is connection reuse. Okay, you can avoid the pain of having a connection if you already paid that pain and can just reuse it, right? And if you can't do that, you want to keep as much state in the client as possible to let the client bootstrap the connection quickly. Okay, so connection reuse is persistent connections. The web has done this for a long time. And then connection restart uses 2 approaches, one of which is already standardized for restarting TLS, the other of which is under discussion, but there's well-known implementations in Linux and other operating systems. Okay, so that's the key thing. Keep your connections open as long as you can, and if you can't, restart them quickly using these tweaks. Okay, now let me tell you about what you have to do to your implementation. There's 2 things you have to do in the DNS server and client. So the first is query pipelining. So by default, currently, you open a query, you send a single query over a single TCP connection, you get that response back, and then you send another query. That's costing a lot of RTTs. So what we'd like to do is pipelining. We want to send multiple queries down the TCP channel, let them be processed whenever they're processed, and get the responses back. Okay, that's pipelining. And pipelining matters because when we look at web pages, most of the web pages have multiple DNS names on them. So you often have to respond. You often have to resolve multiple IPs quickly. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is out-of-order processing. So you all know DNS is not just client to server, but there's a stub and a recursive and authoritative. So with in-order processing, and this is what bind and unbound do today, if they get multiple queries at the left here, they're very happy to do that, and then they process them one by one, because why would anyone send multiple queries over TCP? And that causes the same kind of RTTs that we talked about before. And so it's very important to process these things in parallel at the server, and it's very important to send the replies back out of order, even if you have to. Okay, and this is already done for UDP all the time because UDP has no ordering to it. So this is just a small tweak to bind and unbound, and probably your own servers if you have them. And it's already explicitly allowed in the specifications in the RFCs that you can reorder queries. So that's good to know. And again, this matters because if you don't do reordering and out-of-order processing, you get head-of-line blocking, which is if you get one slow name, everything behind it backs up. Okay. The final piece I want to talk about is to show that this hopefully costs relatively little. And so we did a bunch of analysis and trace replay and experimentation to try to evaluate this. And I want to tell you briefly about that. So there's a whole bunch of questions that I'm going to talk about very briefly, but then there's a technical report you can go through and tear things apart if you're interested. So the first question is about connection reuse. So how often at a server do we see connections getting reused? Well, it's a function of how long we're willing to keep those connections open. But the good news is even with relatively short connection timeouts, we see quite high reuse rates, right? 80% or higher. And so ideally, we'd like to run with 120-second timeouts, which gets us 94% hit rates. However, in practice, we're going to start with a more conservative number, 30-second, 60-second timeouts, which gets us down in the 80s, so still quite good reuse rate. And this data is from trace replay from Diddle data. So thank you, OARC, for having data for us to work on. Okay, so connection reuse, very important here. So the obvious question if you're running a server is what's the pain? How much state does this put on your server? And so when we look at those same traces and look at how much state you have if you keep a connection open for different times, it depends on where you are in the hierarchy. And so with our 120-second timeout, we're talking about gigabytes of RAM, tens to small numbers of tens. With our proposed 30-second, 60-second timeout, we're looking at 9 gigabytes at a recursive resolver and 18 at a root. And these are not small numbers. These are much bigger numbers than you're looking at now with UDP with no caching. But these numbers are not much when you think about hardware that you're buying today. If you buy a server, I'm sorry, your server should have 32 megabytes of RAM, or I'm sorry, 32 gigabytes of RAM if it's a modern server or more. And so I don't think these are out of bounds for typical hardware today. And I should say these are trace replay done with a 360 kilobyte per connection memory usage. We haven't tried to optimize that at all, and I think you could do a lot better there if you push hard on that. So these are very conservative estimates. Okay, so the argument is connection reuse is within the scope of what hardware can do today. And by the way, if your servers aren't this fat, you can just put 2 or 3 servers next to each other and that build out horizontally. Okay. Okay, in terms of CPU cost, there is a higher CPU cost, of course, but for the client's point of view, latency to the authoritative resolver completely dominates CPU cost. And on a server's point of view, my understanding is most servers are running at fairly low CPU utilizations today. Okay, so let's look at how this looks in terms of performance. And so we did some experiments looking at stub to recursive. And the harder bit, if you have a low RTT between your stub and recursive, is doesn't matter what you do, because you're paying extra RTTs, but the stub and the recursive are close to each other, so those RTTs aren't noticeable. Okay, and when we look at pipelining and sending more requests, there's a little bit of delay added because you send a whole bunch of requests and then they queue up. We're sending 140 requests back to back here. The important thing is that it is important to do out-of-order processing, otherwise you get this obnoxious thing that I had to plot on a different scale because it's so bad. That's head-of-line blocking. Okay, so stub to recursive, there's not much cost here. And these numbers are for a 1 millisecond stub to recursive time, which is what we see in our institute where we run our own resolver. At an ISP, you might see 10 milliseconds, and at 10 milliseconds, or 10 or 15 or whatever, the numbers get larger, but not grossly larger. So I can share those offline with you if you want. They didn't make it in the talk. Okay, so let's talk recursive to authoritative. So we played back 140 names with a 35 millisecond delay here. And what we see here is first, the delay that we see by protocol is exactly as predicted back when I counted RTTs, basically. You know, TCP takes an extra RTT, TLS takes 5 extra RTTs because we have to count them all up. So that's bad. But the good news is if we have an open connection, these numbers in the middle, we're back down to 1 RTT, the RTT you have to do to resolve a query anyway. Okay, so connection reuse wins a lot. Okay. So that's what I wanted to say there. So the final performance thing we talk about is end-to-end performance, and this is a little bit more difficult to do. So while we can get isolated experiments at each stage, to get end-to-end performance, we actually model the performance, looking at expected values of query times and number of queries you do at the recursive, and replay traces, the 3 traces I talked about earlier from Tittle, to evaluate this over real data. And so this is the end-to-end performance graph, and this is a little bit complicated, but basically our baseline performance is UDP, both stub to recursive and recursive to authoritative. And then we look at slowdown for using, where's my cursor? Where's my cursor? There it is. Then we look at slowdown for different combinations of what we do stub to recursive along the top line, and then recursive to authoritative along the bottom line. And the hider bit is if we do TLS over the stub to recursive and TCP over the recursive to authoritative, the slowdown is fairly modest, 19 to 33% latency to the clients. And then you can pick different numbers there depending on how close your stub to recursive resolver are and how close your, and what you expect out of your authoritative in terms of privacy. But we think there's a pretty good case to be made that this is a reasonable cost to apply to get privacy between your stub and recursive. So there are alternatives. Stéphane talked about some of them. DNS Curve and DNS Crypt have some very clever hacks to skip some of the RTTs. And if you want to build a custom protocol, those are some things you might want to take advantage of. From our point of view, we'd like to stick with standard protocols and a relatively simple upgrade path to through Start TLS. But you know that you can have different judgment calls there. The same thing with DNS over TLS. People have proposed that. It lets us stick with UDP, but you're still stuck with the kind of RTTs to set up the connection. So I don't think that addresses the fundamental problem here. And then the other important thing is, you know, that's about privacy. In terms of denial of service and the policy constraints that we've been living under, I really think there's a case to be made for using TCP to address those issues. So that's what I wanted to say. So that's the technical report if you're interested in more details. And we have prototype code, and you know, I'm here to get feedback. So now you can start throwing stones, I guess. Questions? From the back.
Thanks. Hi, Jeff Schmidt. So 2 questions. First of all, I think it kind of along the comment that was made earlier, 19 to 33% slowdown in general. You have to think about who will pay for that, privacy versus the slowdown. I think, unfortunately, history tend to show that most people prefer, you know, speed and features over security and privacy most of the time. Second thing, did you look at the impact to Anycast?
Okay, so 2 questions. So is 19 to 33% really modest? You know, that's something you can discuss with your customers. I mean, I know lots of people crank every millisecond out of this thing, and I know a lot of big companies are very interested in that. You know, there's people who care about privacy too, so you can decide how that balances out. And by the way, if you want to lower that, you know, push the recursive resolver closer to your clients or put it in their home router. You know, there's ways to adjust some of that. The second part of your question, which now I've paged out, Anycast. So obviously TCP will break if you have a routing change and you switch Anycast. We have not studied how frequently that happens. You may know better than I. I don't get the sense that routing is changing so frequently. I mean, you should compare that to the timeouts to tear down these connections of 60 to 30 seconds. I don't think, I mean, routing happens on 30-second time granularities anyway. So I don't think that's a top order problem. Other in the front?
Hi, it's Shane Kerr from Dyn again. I actually have a whole bunch of questions, so sorry.
So maybe we should do one or two. And,
okay, I'll just do one question. The first thing is about using start TLS. On my mail client, I can say require TLS and so on. I can't do that in the DNS. So it seems like using start TLS is a potential downgrade attack.
So absolutely, but the same thing is true for. So there is a downgrade attack here, which is that a middle person in the middle can get in and deny TLS. If your policy is that you demand privacy, just like on your email, you should check the box that says, I will only work with TLS. One could have a DNS resolver that says, I will only work with TLS. I mean, that's an operating system configuration issue.
Yeah, so that's true, but like Stéphane said, in terms of scalability, I don't think it's practical because until almost everyone supports this new protocol, I can't insist on it, right? So,
so just like we had incremental deployment of start TLS for SMTP, we could do the same thing here. And if you're using a remote public DNS service that supports this, you could hard code yourself to stick with them.
I think you could work around it with a small change, which is that you have to include some sort of signaling, a new resource record at the parent or even at the child, or something like that, so that a resolver can actually avoid the downgrade.
Okay, so maybe we should talk about that offline. Okay, I'm over here.
Matt Poundset from Affilius. I wanted to comment on your characterization of the resource requirements as being not particularly significant.
Yeah. Okay, so I've gotten beat up on latency and then memory. That's the other thing.
Well, not just memory though. Although the memory is certainly the bigger problem, I think. You know, without trying to not reveal too much, to add 40 gigs to every single one of my name servers actually pushes me into buying larger sticks of RAM, not just more of them.
Yeah.
And that's actually a significant cost.
Okay.
Right? The difference between a 64 gig stick of RAM versus 128 versus 256 is astronomical. Right? So that I think you're looking more at small DNS servers in terms of how much they're impacted. So a small DNS server that's only got a couple of small zones on it, sure, they've got oodles of free RAM.
So look, you guys have way more operational experience than I, and so that's a very valid stone to throw. Okay, I gave you very conservative numbers using a very conservative estimate of memory. I am quite certain we can crank that down, but in my graphs. But it's going to take more work to figure out how tight we can get that per connection, memory per connection.
Yeah.
Of course, there are different pricing regimes for different memory sizes, and you know your operation far better than I do. I think you can build out horizontally and hash across a bunch of boxes.
We do. But again, that's building out more horizontally for this. It's again not a small increase.
So look, it's going to cost resources if we go to TLS. The community will need to decide if privacy matters or not. And the one argument I would make is, regardless of how we do this, whether it's DNS over TLS, whether it's DNS over DTLS, whether it's DNS curve crypt, whatever, you're gonna get stuck with the crypto latency and having, if not TCP connections, the equivalent of TCP connections, because crypto needs a channel. So we should be thinking about that.
The discussion of the trade-off is a good discussion to have, but we need to be honest about what the actual cost is.
And I try to give some initial data for that, and then now you can come beat me up privately about how expensive your RAM is. Joe.
Joe Abley, Dyn. So I think, to Matt's point, it seems to me that the amount of resources consumed on the server is not entirely driven by the behavior of the clients, because you could manage constrained resources and close TCP sessions ahead of time or idle them out according to some local policy. You could refuse TCP and force people to go back to UDP if you wanted and get some of the benefit, but not have unconstrained explosion of RAM in the server. So it seems like there are lots of tweaks here we can do, and Paul Wouters and I started down this road in the different but similar idea of keeping TCP sessions open to do multiple DNSSEC type exchanges with mobile clients who might prefer to do a single TCP session than lots of UDP ones.
Yeah.
So I think there's some work there that could be reused. And my other comment was the stability of TCP sessions on services that are distributed with Anycast. One possible approach there, which we touched on kind of sort of sneakily just in one sentence without explaining what we meant in those drafts, was that we could use TCP multipath here. We could actually use...
I mean, yes, of course.
We don't have that many code bases to talk to, and it does seem to be somewhat deployed. But anyway, in principle, if we use the Anycast address to establish a session and then fall back to a more stable unicast address, we can avoid the routing churn. Memory's cheap apparently, so that's fine.
Okay, so I'm sorry. Now I've paged out the beginning of your thing because I was so overwhelmed by TCP multipath.
So managing RAM resources for...
Oh yeah. Yeah. So good ideas. Lovely. Have at it, please. I'll take that as a higher bid in favor of TCP. In the back. Oh, somebody who doesn't have the mic. Can somebody get the mic to the gentleman in the blue? Oh, see, we're thrashing over mics.
Hi. Jim, do you still want to ask a question?
Is the problem.
So am I on, or is it someone else? So George from APNIC. I want to believe. I mean, we seriously, no, I do, because we did some measurement on the authority side, forcing TC1 with deliberate packet truncate to try and see how many people could do TCP, and we had some fun with that. And I want to be there. The one observation that I wanted to make is, I think 10 milliseconds of delay in the stub to resolver is really optimistic for a lot of the non-mainstream US. And there's an aspect of that I think goes to your total delay cost, because that is an unavoidable serialization mode in there. So I think you need to think about that potentially being more like 60, 70, 80 milliseconds of delay.
Lord, that gets me across the country, man.
Yeah, but I mean, I know I shouldn't use my personal conditions to predict the wider world, but in Australia, a lot of the long-haul nets centralized to a city. But the same is true in Asia. People do deployments that have a lot of delay.
Okay, yeah. So look, there's a real serious conversation about what is the client to stub, what's the stub to recursive resolver latency. So our 1 millisecond is definitely optimistic. We got that off of Planet Lab, and I've gotten beaten up about that already. If you believe the Bismarck results, which are US home routers, 3,000 or 4,000 sampled, they'll tell you 10 to 15, and some people are already shaking their heads over that.
I would say MLabs and people like that have good data on this worldwide, and I think the answer is tell the ISPs to deploy locally.
Yeah,
anyway.
So those are 2 data points. I can't figure out why we don't have recursive resolvers in those stupid boxes they ship to people's homes. They're more than capable enough to do that today. Well, they're all broken. Okay, fine.
So the second analog of the question is we still don't have a good handle on the length of the resolver.
We need to get a better handle on latency. So look, it's going to take years to shift if we decide to go to TCP, and it will take years to start to clean up all those stupid broken home routers. So what I would encourage you to do is not think about the brokenness of today, but think about where we want to be 5 years when Stéphane's draft finally comes out of the IETF or something. So you got to kind of separate the timescales here. And I realize we're in a sad, broken world today. Don't let that completely constrain our view, is my opinion. But anyway.
So one final question, and then we need to move ahead to the next.
Jim Reed, just some random guy off the street. John, have you any data on the CPU loading on a busy authoritative server from this combination of TCP and TLS?
I have some data.
I'm thinking about the resource impacts there, particularly for the crypto on a root server or TLD server or something like that.
I have some data, which is that DNS right now is very sparse, although my data is not for .com, which is bigger and I'm sure is uglier. Or large domains. More work is needed there, clearly. You know, this is going to be a big CPU increase, but what I'm told by the people that I talk to is CPU currently is not the fundamental constraint, which is why I personally focus on memory as the scariest resource. But you know, you can come back and correct me. So.
Okay.
Anyway, I think we're out of time.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
that brings us to the third and final talk for this session. Bruce Van Nuys from Nominum. And we will here talk about zeroing in on 0 days.
Great, yeah, I'm going to talk about some attack activity we've been seeing. I don't know how Ralph made it onto these slides. And I apologize, Paul wasn't able to make it out to Warsaw for this event. Anyway, we spoke at the last OARC, and I think we gave an idea of the kind of data that we collect. We get data from providers around the world. This is all resolver data. We get about 1 terabyte a day, more or less in real time as it comes off. Oh, sorry about that. As it comes off the resolvers, we roughly estimate this is about 5% of ISP resolver traffic. I guess we could quibble about, you know, whether it's 3 or 4 or 5, but it's somewhere in that vicinity. 5 makes some of the math easy. We actually get a fair amount of data from China, which is kind of relevant to this discussion. A lot of the activity that we're seeing is focused on, we think, various kinds of websites in China. Thus far, we haven't gotten much response data. That's changing. We're trying to get more data there because we think that's going to be useful just to tracking some of the things that are going on out there. We also have a lot of other data sources that we use to correlate the real-time resolver data that we get. So has anyone been seeing queries that look like this? So I guess depending where you are in the world, you're probably seeing a lot of this activity. And so this sort of hit our radar a couple months back, and we've been watching it very carefully since then. So I have a lot of slides that provide some details on what's been happening, but not at all surprised that others are seeing it too. It's been something that, you know, we saw a very noticeable uptick. I'll show you a graph in a minute. So we first started to see this in a significant way in March, but some of the early activity we actually saw in January. And what we've been seeing, there are thus far around 950 names that are being attacked. And the typical scenario is these names will be attacked for a day or two. We see queries for these names at resolvers worldwide, so we have presence everywhere. And we see that the attacks or attack-related queries start and stop at about the same time on a worldwide basis, so there's no localization. They start and stop at the same time everywhere in the world. Usually there's one more label than a resolvable domain, so the first label is random, or pseudo-random, actually, to be more precise. And usually what we see are millions or tens of millions of these randomized subdomains associated with the parent domain that's being attacked. In a lot of cases, the authoritative servers fail, and if they stay up, they usually give back NX domain, although recently we've also been seeing no data or no error returned. Mostly queries for these names are very low, so I'll show a slide where we track what happened during the attack, and then you'll see the normal day-to-day activity is extremely low. And most of the names that we're seeing attacked seem to be within China, predominantly like Chinese gaming sites or adult sites. There are some notable exceptions to that. I'll show a slide that covers that as well. We're also seeing that the IPs that are sending attack-related queries correlate really strongly with open DNS proxies or resolvers, and so I'll comment on that. That's another area that we've been investigating. So you can see from this chart, sorry, the dates are sort of a mess at the bottom of the slide, but it was about January 28th, which is just before the small peak on the left, that we started seeing a noticeable uptick in this activity, and you'll see it jumped pretty rapidly from there. So we went from a unique name count of around 100 million names a day up to peaks that we're seeing now of 500 million. So this gives a sense of the scale of the attacks that are going on. And so this is actually from the beginning of the year on the left to like last week, I think was when we did the cutoff on the right-hand side. So just some of the characteristics of the target names. Some are actually ranked very highly on Alexa. I'll show you those rankings in a sec. As I said, most of them we think are Chinese gaming sites. We actually have a researcher. He's from China, so it's been a huge help in this particular situation. Having someone that speaks Chinese, there's a lot of interesting things that have come along as we've been researching this. One of the other things he's figured out is that it looks as though some of these gaming sites exist on hacked, legitimate sites. There's a small number of adult content sites. There's a UK gaming site that was being attacked. Baidu was actually being attacked. In fact, I don't know what happened to my slide. Actually, it looked fine when it wasn't in slideshow view. So I apologize for that. It makes it a little bit harder to read. But anyway, you'll see that Baidu obviously is very, very highly ranked. Some of these others are highly ranked. About 7% of the names were in the Alexa 1 million. So that was what, like 93 names or something like that. 92% have never been on Alexa or the Alexa 1 million. And what we did is since these attacks happened over time, some of these domains would pop on and off Alexa, and or their rank would change, and so we normalized all that. So these may not be the ranks that you'd see today, but you'll see that there are a noticeable number of names that are recognizable and prominent, in the scope of the internet. As I mentioned, this is it's resolver data that we see. That's the software that we sell most often is resolver software. But just to give a sense of what happens to the resolvers, this is a graph showing recursion context. So you'll see these huge spikes. Again, this was over, let's see, from the 10th of March to last week. And so this is the impact that our customers see. I don't remember if this was what the data sampling rate was, whether it was by the hour or another window. Anyway, the customers experience spikes. So this is the stress that they encounter. Obviously, the real peaks are going to be much higher than this. Our servers tend to be pretty resilient, so we haven't seen them fail, but this is the kind of thing that causes the ops teams to take notice. Just in terms of CPU utilization, you'll see, over the same time frame, big spikes there. Normal operating range is a few percent, 5 to 10%, and they were seeing averages closer to 25%. So again, this is the kind of thing that most of our customers notice. In terms of the attack distribution, most of the domains or most of the names were only attacked for a day. So you'll see about 72% were only attacked for 1 day, and jumps up to 90% of the attacks were 2 days or less. You'll see the distribution all the way out to, there's this outlier. One of the names was attacked for 17 days, but in general, the duration from the standpoint of the number of days that the name was under attack is relatively short. We actually have other data that shows the number of hours. So this is, if there was an attack on a name in a day, then it got logged as an attack for a day. It wasn't that the duration was a day. So this just shows the distribution in terms of the amount of time that a name might be used for these attacks versus the actual query attack activity. So we log that separately. In terms of the names used, you'll see the one I showed at the beginning for the example of just the query activity and the randomization. These probably aren't familiar to most people in the room. Actually, it's kind of interesting because I have another slide which shows names which in English appear to be random, but apparently in Chinese, our Chinese researcher can regularly categorize what the name would be associated with just by looking at half a dozen English characters. So there's something phonetic that he can use. We're not able to do that as non-Chinese speakers. But anyway, these are the top 10 names that have been used for these attacks. This is a month of worldwide activity for the name that I started with. So you'll see very intensive activity. In this case, this was attacked for 6 days. But I made the point about how otherwise the activity is very low, and you'll see that it is. When the name isn't being attacked, it would get 1 or 2 queries per day. In fact, there were several days where it didn't get any at all. So other than when these attacks occur, these are not resources that are widely accessed, at least for the data that we have. We don't get data from every server, obviously. We only get data from a small percentage of our customers, but we think it's probably reasonably representative. So in terms of the daily query pattern, This is a 1 minute average, so pretty fine grained, but you'll see, you know, not unexpectedly, there's, you know, these big peaks and valleys. So this is for that same domain that I started the presentation with. So this is, I mentioned that we're seeing a really strong correlation with the open resolvers. So we've worked with Jared. I think he's here, and we worked with one of our customers. Most of the data that we get is anonymized, but we wanted to see if these open resolvers or open DNS proxies, as we believe they are a vector. And so we were able to get some IP data, and we correlated it. And you can see there's a really strong correlation. I think Jared does the scans, is it every 2 weeks? Every week? So, you know, we noticed that, you know, there's usually a drop-off in the correlation because, you know, some of the addresses roll. But anyway, you can see that there's a very, very strong correlation. It's clear that the open resolvers or open DNS proxies are being used for this purpose, and we verified that in some other ways. So just in terms of what all this means and the research that we're doing, we've actually had some success figuring out what the randomization algorithms are. So we can detect the spikes really quickly. We can analyze the subdomains. We can identify the pattern. We haven't been able to do that in all cases. So one of the things that we have the ability to do is there's some other validation that goes on in terms of the popularity of the name, but we can move these names to a monitor or block list, and that's a list that we can distribute in real time out to our customers. When we see new patterns, we have the ability to automatically monitor those and, you know, do subsequent research to try to figure out what those patterns are. But in general, what we're trying to do is greatly reduce the cycle time from when an attack starts to recognizing what the pattern is and being able to move it, like I said, to a monitor or block list. For new domains with familiar patterns, we can usually do that in about 20 minutes. For new patterns, we're actually working on algorithms to automate that. The lists that we create are also distributed automatically to our customers. That's configurable, but we can greatly reduce the cycle time from when one of these things starts to, you know, the domain or the name that's involved to getting it on a list where someone can take action, you know, much more quickly. We know this is going to get harder. We know the attackers are going to adapt. They always do. So, you know, I have some thoughts about that toward the end of the presentation. So one of the things we saw that was kind of interesting was there's an abrupt end to this activity in mid-April. And again, we have a Chinese researcher, so he did a little due diligence and wondered if it had anything to do with there was a crackdown in China at the same time. And one of the things he said is that a lot of times attackers lay low when this, you know, government activity is going on. So there were some headlines. There was this was from Wikipedia. Did a translate. You can see it's okay. It's not a great translation, but there was a big push to eliminate pornography on the net. So we think that the drop-off in activity was just a response to this, either because these domains were being filtered otherwise, or because the attackers decided it wasn't such a great time to be launching their attacks. So there's also an article in a Chinese newspaper or online publication. One of the things that we've been thinking about is what's the motive. Obviously, that's a question that you always ask in these kind of circumstances. You know, it's not a big secret that there's a lot of skirmishing among small website owners. There's also gamers that, you know, do various things to compromise their opponents. So, you know, that's an obvious motive. One of the other things we're wondering about is whether there's been, you know, this is testing or perfecting techniques for some sort of bigger event. Just there's other things going on around this that make us question that. Just kind of looking at some of the querying that goes on prior to an attack, we're wondering if, you know, someone's just practicing for something else. We know there's lots of services out there that can be used. I don't think it's a big secret. You guys have probably been to these pages. This one was kind of interesting because just a testament to the kind of marketing that they're doing. One of the DDoS site owners did this video. So it's a, I don't know, 4 or 5 minute video showing what he can do. This is one of the config screens. My Chinese isn't so good, so I can't give you all the details of what's on here, but this is from the video, and he goes through and shows all the things that you can configure, and then he actually goes and shows what happens in real time to the website that he's using or that he's attacking. Unfortunately, the video itself is in Chinese, so I would have given you the link. I don't know how useful it would have been. If anyone's interested, I'm happy to do that. Same deal. These guys all advertise. Again, I don't think this is a big secret. What was interesting was if you look at the text, you'll see that now they're selling open DNS resolver lists. So, not unexpected. I think these guys understand that it's a handy resource for launching these attacks. One of the other things we've seen is when we look at the query patterns surrounding the attack queries, there are queries that occur before that, and we actually think those are queries where they're sort of testing to see where the open resolvers are, because like I said, the lists can age, and so the addresses that you have at one point may not give you a complete list of what's out there. So it looks like the attackers test to see that what they want to use for their attack is actually available. So it's possible that the guys that are selling these lists go to that, take steps like that to be sure that their list is good and current and all that. With regard to the open DNS proxies, if you've been to Nanog or Ripe or Apricot or other places, this is a site you may have seen, and it's appeared in other places. But we started working with Jared, 6-8 months ago, something like that. We were kind of surprised by some of the results of his scans. In particular, he showed that there were originally something like 400,000 of our servers that were open, which really surprised us because we haven't sold anywhere near 400,000 servers. Ralph always likes to say that we'd all be retired if we'd been able to sell that many servers. But anyway, that caused us to try to understand what else might be going on, and we came to the conclusion that there are home gateways out there. They just came up minutes ago in the prior presentation. I think everyone knows. Some of these devices have undesirable characteristics, and this is one of them. Basically, there's an open DNS proxy that runs in some of the home gateways that are out there, and attackers can use that to bounce queries to whatever resolver they're configured to use. So we see this in a lot of the networks and customers that we work with, and it's not a big secret, it's a big problem. Everyone in this room has been dealing with this for DNS amplification. But we're also seeing it for these pseudo-random subdomain attacks. So not only are they being used for DNS amplification, but as I said, we verified that the query patterns and attacks that I just described also use these open home gateways. So this just sort of illustrates the steps in terms of how it works. This is just a heat map showing where they are. Unfortunately, you can see that the mapping isn't perfect. It was just an issue with the tool that we used. We played around with a bunch. This was the best that we could find, but it still gives you a good sense of where these things are. So it is, fairly a global problem. You can see it's highly concentrated in Eastern Asia and Central Europe and parts of Latin America. So our estimate is there's somewhere, well, Jared's scan shows there's around 24 million open resolvers. We think the majority are actually these open DNS proxies. So one of the other things I wanted to mention, just in passing, is there are certainly other uses for random subdomains. We've seen this query pattern before. So this is Dan's famous slide from his presentation at the hacker conference, sorry. Black Cat, right, in August of 2008. So, that was one of the tricks he used for cache poisoning. So, certainly this is an additional reason for concern. We think that a lot of the activity we've seen has been for DDoS, but that same pattern is useful for other things. Kind of leads me to my next slide. I couldn't resist using this graphic because I do think there's this really interesting tension between the cache poisoning problem and the DDoS problem, and there's this tension in terms of the interrelation between the two and steps you might take for one that could potentially make the other one worse. And so, I don't know, this graphic just seemed to capture that really nicely, and I put DNSSEC on the wire there. There's certainly been a lot more discussion about using DNSSEC, and I think, there's a lot of agreement that in many ways it's the right thing to do, but, the larger response sizes created with signed data certainly have the potential to make the DDoS problem worse. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. And this as well, just from our own observations. You know, we operate at not huge scale, but reasonable scale. We think we have a pretty good subset of data that's representative of what's going on in the greater internet. We know the open DNS proxies are a real issue. Our customers are contending with that. We know from this research that we've been doing that there's infrastructure out there that's very well equipped for sending fake queries, these randomized queries. We know whoever's doing this is certainly, you know, has lots of testing. This has been going on for a couple of months, so billions and billions and billions of queries have been sent, and just the way that it's been happening suggests that whoever's behind it is being very methodical. We don't know that there's infrastructure for sending fake answers. Like I said, we don't actually get much response data. That's something that we're working on. So we don't have anything that suggests that what's been going on is cache poisoning attempts. So, you know, I put that as a question mark. But minimally, we know there's DDoS exposure. Like I said, we know our resolvers are impacted. They don't fail, but typically are stressed to a point where providers notice and take steps. We know there's impact on the authoritative infrastructure. Like I said, most cases we get surf fails when these attacks are going on. So there's absolutely impact and DDoS exposure there. And we think there's potential cache poisoning exposure as well. So in terms of the way forward, data, I think customers, our provider customers are really getting on board. They're realizing logging is a good thing. I know we just talked about DNS privacy, so I don't know how that'll sit with the privacy advocates. But I guess if someone were to ask me that question, I'd say, you know, would you want to put a blindfold on this guy? Fast automated detection is going to be really important. That's an area that we're investing a lot in. We think it's going to be critical to be able to see this activity and characterize it very quickly. Dynamic threat lists are going to become more and more important, so those will be derived from fast detection. Some sort of policy framework to do very fine-grained filtering will also be important in DNSSEC. So that's all I have. Any questions?
Hi, Chris Baker from Dyn. So when a few of those names popped up on the screen, I just instantly pulled out my laptop to compare to a list that we have. Now, an interesting thing in this case was these were hitting one of our Anycast pops due to a misconfigured customer. So the customer thought they were pointing this traffic at a recursive, but they were actually pointing it at our authoritative servers.
Yeah.
So if you can and would like to compare notes, I have a massive volume of PCAPs from a few weeks worth of this.
Okay.
Just to get some comparison on the signal you're seeing, because in our case, we do have responses, but they're all refused responses because we don't have these zones.
Yeah.
But a volume of data, and I'd love to shine any light that we can on this.
Sure. Yeah, I think actually we'd like to do that. We're trying to collaborate where we can. So I'll get a card offline.
So.
Good. Any other questions?
Kathy Almond, ISC. You said that you think that most of the traffic is originating from compromised CPU devices. I wondered if you'd seen any evidence of it originating from, not compromised, open CPU devices, from compromised consumer and compromised client devices.
Yeah, I don't know that they're necessarily compromised so much as, you know, they're probably not properly built to begin with. So maybe it nets to the same thing.
I was thinking of devices involved in a botnet or something like that.
Yeah, we don't see a strong correlation between bots. One of the other things we do is we can look at queries and we can use that to determine whether or not an IP is infected. And so there actually isn't a strong correlation to that. In fact, no comparison at all between that correlation and what you just saw with the open DNS proxies. So we tend to think that it's that, because when you think about it, I mean, it's pretty handy for an attacker. They really don't have to do anything at all except decide what IP they want to send to. They don't have to have anything that's installed on a client machine. So just in terms of the infrastructure that they need, in many ways it makes things easier that they can just use these. In fact, you probably noticed this is something that, you know, we've been talking about and trying to get attention applied to, so it's a problem that obviously needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
It does.
Good.
I was going to say, Jared Mach, NTT. I was just going to comment a little bit on Kathy's question as well. A lot of the CPE devices, there's been a downward trend line this year of the data set for the open resolvers showing that some of them are getting fixed. I don't know if they're all just bricking and people are replacing them at homes, but it's definitely been a lot of the broken behavior, responding from the wrong port and stuff like that, that has definitely been on a downward trend line. So it seems like the equipment manufacturers have kind of picked up on the fact they're listening to DNS queries on the WAN and other stuff like that. The other thing I'd like to just add as a comment is that the data set that, so there's two data sets involved here. One is one that I'm specifically doing with Nominum. They haven't said anything either way, so I'm not offering to share the data for that that we've been doing with them. But the Open Resolver project data set is absolutely available for especially anyone in this room and in the community if you have researchers who want to look at that.
Jeff Schmidt, nice work, thank you. Related to the last two lines of questioning, one of the things that we saw were long-lived pseudo-random query sets when we looked at the diddle data for collisions-related stuff. We saw about 8 or 9 very distinct patterns of long-lived pseudo-random queries coming from lots of different QNames structures. We worked with a couple of malware researchers and found that there were some classes of adware and click fraud tools that were generating those. So click fraud tools plus things like DNS search path yielded these very odd-looking QNames that we saw in the data sets. This looks more like an attack because of the definitive start-stop periods. Yep. The stuff we were seeing was long-lived. I'd be happy to compare notes offline to look at those.
Great. Yeah, we'd like to do the same.
Okay, any more questions?
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Any other final remarks? Oh.
I didn't speak up earlier. I want to speak in support of Stéphane's query minimization proposal because he was wrong about something he said, where he said that there might be more queries. Or someone in the audience said so, and he agreed. At the moment, if you send, let's say, foo.corp to a root server and then bar.corp to a root server, you have to send them separately. The root server would like to be able to tell you that .corp does not exist, but it can't. The signaling doesn't work that way. Using query minimization, you will learn that corp does not exist, and you won't make the second query. And we will reduce dramatically the number of queries hitting the root servers, at least, possibly other servers, if we move to this. There's an additional advantage. If www.badguy.com has a TTL of a week, but badguy.com is taken away from him in the first hour of his criminal enterprise, that the rest of the week disappears if we're doing query minimization. It does not disappear. That www.badguy.com sits in your cache for the full week otherwise. So again, I'm speaking in favor of Stéphane's proposal for query minimization. Thank you.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of the first afternoon session. Apparently we do have a coffee break, don't we? Cool. Then enjoy your coffee and we'll reconvene in 15 minutes.
Thank you. We have 1 hour and a half for this session between 3 talks. By the way, my name is Sebastian. I'm the program committee chair, and I will be chairing this session together with Sean here. We have 3 talks. There will be more than enough time according to us, but hopefully there will be lots of questions. After this, we have beer. Yay. So hold on there if you are jet lag a little bit or a lot like me, which is, yeah, for me it's like 5 a.m. in the morning. You're welcome for all your questions. We have some interesting stuff to show, and we will start with Nat Morris on Anycast on a budget or a shoestring, or Anycast without your wife finding out about your credit card billing charges. All right. So Nat, the floor is yours.
Hi, I'm Nat. Nat Morris from the UK. I provide consultancy to like ISPs and hosting companies. I also work for Cumulus Networks, who have an operating system that runs on network switches. And I've seen a few of you before from the UK NOF event, so I'm a board member of that. That's my wife, Claire. She's in charge of the purse strings. There's my little dog, Toby. And we live out in West Wales in the UK. So in summary, I want to talk about today is like an Anycast network that I built in the last sort of 6 months. I was motivated by 2 presentations I saw. Bill Woodcott's San Gate about best practices building Anycast, and Dave Knight's dense Anycast deployment, where they talk about using Puppet and using VMs to provide name service. And I also wanted to gain more experience about building and automating distributed systems using tools like Puppet and Chef and all that kind of hipster good stuff. I probably got too many slides, so I'll talk quickly, and you can download the slides if you want to read more. So my thoughts were, how can I do this without spending too much? And as a side project, does Claire need to find out? So my kind of tolerance level, I said that I wanted to spend, I would spend up to about £1,000 a year as my operational costs on building out an Anycast deployment. And what did I want to offer? So I didn't want to become part of the problem and offer like a resolver service. So I was going to only offer secondary DNS to friends and family. It support IPv4, and because Martin's here, it support V6 as well. And it'll be a free service with no SLA. So these are kind of my requirements. So I've already got like a management network that I have a bunch of tunnels to my house that's in AS30746, and I had a spare RIPE PI /24 and a 48. So I applied, filled out the RIPE form and applied for a new ASN. So I was kind of up to cost. It was costing now like €50 a year for that kind of AS assignment from RIPE. I needed a highly automated framework that I was going to build, and I wanted to play with all these new tools. And my intention is to sort of open source everything, so I've been putting stuff on GitHub as well. So this is the design that I started off with. I have in my management network, I have a transfer host called axfr.escop.com, and the master servers for the domains are hosted off-net, and I take the zone transfers into that box. That box then also does zone transfers out to the various Anycast nodes that I've deployed around the place. My own zones are hosted on another name server in the same AS. This supports notifies as well, so people on their master can do notify, and it kind of trickles down, so the updates go through straight away. I store everything in JSON. I'm using RethinkDB, which is like a distributed document database. It's quite freeform. I can just write JSON and don't have to define a schema or anything. I have kind of attributes and values. And it means I can come up with this kind of nice nested config. So on the right-hand side, this is the definition of one of my Anycast nodes. So I have some attributes that say like what city it's in, the lat long of where it is, and then I start storing all the metadata about the node, like the management IPs and the peers and which communities I send on those sessions. And I use the same JSON database to store all the domains as well. Just the metadata about the domain, the name and the master IP and whose account it's on. So that there's an example of that on the left there. So this was kind of my design for the application, the kind of engine behind it. I wanted to have a REST API that everything talked to. So I kind of shield RethinkDB with this REST API that has all the logic in there. And one of the problems I came up against initially was how to kind of trigger the Anycast authoritative boxes out there about new updates, new zones, or people wanted to change their master IP and stuff. And I wanted to do that quite quickly. I didn't want to have like a cron job on there. So I came across Beanstalk, which is like a message queue that you can add jobs into and then have subscribers. So I have some daemons that run on the AXFR box and all the Anycast box, the script that's running all the time, and that subscribes to Beanstalk. When changes are made via the REST API, it just adds a little job in. So it updates the database straight away, but it adds a job for each Anycast box. Then the Anycast boxes quickly see the change and push the new config out locally and restart or poke the DNS daemon that's running. So now people can just go to the API and add a zone, and then within sort of 3 or 4 or 5 seconds, it's live on all the edge boxes. So network-wise, each Anycast node has a default route static to the provider, just like in the Etsy network interfaces file. And then at the moment of running Quagga, started off with ExaBGP, but to announce the /24 and the 48. All the management traffic is inside OpenVPN, because I didn't really trust some of these locations where the boxes were going. So I had another loopback on each of the little Anycast nodes, and run BGP inside OpenVPN just for that management traffic. And this meant that I didn't have to do kind of TSIG between my AXFR box and the Edge Anycast nodes, because that was all in the OpenVPN tunnel. And this also protects all the Beanstalk traffic and the collectd and everything else that I'm doing, like my monitoring of those boxes. So where to host the nodes? It couldn't cost too much a month, so that kind of ruled out renting dedicated servers and colo boxes. And then, having seen presentations from this forum and others, virtual machines came up. Oh, could I use low-cost hardware? So the first kind of VPS provider I looked at was Mythic Beasts in the UK. They had a VM offer that was 512 meg of RAM, single CPU, 10 gig of disk, 75 gig of bandwidth. So this was like $141 a year. So I knew they were kind of clueful in the Linux shop, so I just bought the VM, not knowing that if they could do the BGP element or not. And then I went onto their support page and opened a ticket, and I just wrote, literally, I have a /24 and a 48. Can you set me up a BGP session? I was waiting for them to kick back and say no, knowing that I could use the VM for something else. But they just replied saying that they set the peering session up and they'd noticed that I'd updated the right DB and everything was cool. And I was like, this is easy. So I had my first node up, and the bgp.he.net was showing that, and it was all good. So then moving on, where can I find more of these kind of friendly VM hosts? So I spent like many hours sat on the sofa hiding from Claire that I was spending all this money, trying to find places that were kind of clueful VM providers. So I found Low End Box, which is like some forum for people that are operating VM shops out of their garages and stuff. The criteria for advertising on there is that the VMs are less than $10 a month, so this was perfect. My big worry was that I wanted to avoid VM providers that were using OpenVZ, because when you use OpenVZ in those containers, normally you don't have the separate routing table per VM. So I needed a VM provider that would bridge the VM onto their network. So I was looking for people that had KVM, Zen, and VMware offers, so I can run Quagga or Bird in that box. The other place I found was Low End Talk, which is the forum that goes with that kind of advertising site, and there were lots of people on there. And the other thing, if you just Google VPS BGP session, you'll find people that are kind of now selling this stuff. So the first one I went to was AnyNode in Detroit. They were listing on Low End Talk, and I sent them a private message on this forum, and they said they could support VPS on anything. There was no like entry level. They didn't want me to have a dedicated server. So I got a VM for $80 a year in Detroit. Here's kind of the order that came through, and I was like, this one was easy as well. So I now had kind of 2 boxes up and running, still within budget. And this was kind of my Indian bargain. This was the third VM. So LeapSwitch, like another little hosting company, they were based in India. They had an offer on their website for $120 a year for a VM. And I was kind of all ready to kind of put this in my spreadsheet and get it set up. And then Googling LeapSwitch and on Google, I found this promo code. So the promo code was a recurring discount of $72 a year, which brought the VM in India down to $48 for the whole year. And that's a VM on their platform that includes a BGP session with full table. And looking back, like maybe in the late 90s when I was like ordering killer stream lines and stuff and having to pay carriers £1,000 turnip fee for BGP, this was like quite shocking now that I can just not buy like a takeout in the evening, but I can use that money to build a Anycast network. So now these 3 VMs up and running. So I had a KVM host of my own in London, so I spun that up as well. So I had 4 now, so 2 in London, 1 in Detroit, another in India. And spinning up the VM was really quick and simple because I used all these kind of automation tools. So I'd add an entry into the JSON database. So I'd create that text in like a text editor and just paste it in as a new node. And then install Debian on the box because I didn't trust their install. And then I'd install Puppet, sign the cert on my side, and then Puppet would go off and grab the configs out of Rethink and stuff. So it'd install collect dbind, custom daemons and stuff, and it was done. So then going to conferences and stuff, people were asking what I was up to. I was like, oh, playing around with Anycast. So they're like, oh, have a VM with us. So there were some friendly people at Fluency. They're like an Edinburgh regional ISP. They offered me a VM on their platform. I think that's maybe KVM on Red Hat. Not a product they normally offer. People I dealt with before in Boston at TowardX. I'd had an offer. Someone noticed that my prefixes were appearing, and this chap from Germany got in touch and said, do you want to swap a VM? So I did. So quickly after a month on my little knock.sgobble.com site, it lists out all the nodes. So these are the 7 nodes I had running after a month around the place. And then people came up to me and said, we'd like to help you. This looks like fun and stuff. And what can we learn from all this stuff you're putting on GitHub? But the issue was we can host something, but not a VM. So this was kind of, there were various issues like maybe the network engineers weren't allowed on their hosting platform. They couldn't spin up Proxmox VMs, or they had maybe the organization didn't have any VM infrastructure at all. They were like a carrier or a L2 service or something. Or like I said earlier, the hypervisor that they were using was doing the routing, which was problematic. Or possibly, in some cases, the hypervisor infrastructure was often behind a firewall, so I couldn't get a BGP session in. So the solution in that case was a Raspberry Pi. So these are a $35 little ARM unit. You can pick them up from like Radio Shack or some high street place. 512 mega RAM, 16 gig SD card, and I thought I'd overclock them all to 800 megahertz to try to get more queries after them. So I sent a Raspberry Pi in a Jiffy bag in the post. So my friend David Farrell at T-Bus in Belfast, and initially at that point I was running NSD3 on there, and that was running great. But adding zones into NSD3 required a service restart, and I wasn't really happy about that. So I swapped to Power DNS on like my VMs on my laptop. That was all great and everything was good. And then I flipped the switch on Puppet and got all the nodes to remove NSD3 and push Power DNS out. And then suddenly this little Raspberry Pi in Belfast, the CPU on it started going crazy because the PDNS control program started segfaulting on there. So at this point, I was like, oh, it's all broken. I need to do something. So sat in a cafe in the States. I just flipped it all to bind at that point, which is kind of easy when you have the automation set up. And then more people were talking to me about what I was doing. So my friend Matt from SFMix, he said, why don't you come up here and connect to our IXP? So they're an IXP based in like 200 Paul and I think 365 main. And I couldn't turn it down really. So I needed to find a box that had 2 NICs, was slightly more powerful than a Raspberry Pi. So I found a Fit2 PCI, which is like some people use them for consoles, like terminal server boxes or home media stuff. So this is like an Atom with 1 gig of RAM, 16 gig SSD, and I found it for $150 on eBay. So I connected to one port, went to the IX, and the other went on an OOB session, and then I added my peering DB record and started peering with like HENet, ISC people in this room, layer 42 and stuff. So you didn't realize that the little box was tucked in 0 U of rack space. Connected to the IX and serving the DNS request. So then I had more issues with that Raspberry Pi in Belfast. Like Puppet was a dog on there because it's like Ruby, and loading zones was a bummer. So more people were offering to host nodes. Friend Andy Davidson, some of you know, is running a Allegro out of Manchester. He was like, oh, you can put a box in our site. Again, they didn't have a VM infrastructure, so I needed to find a solution. So what I came across was the Gigabit Bricks, which is like this little box here. It's kind of a little bit smaller than a Mac Mini, 1.8 gigahertz. I think they're 4 cores, which is good. 4 gig of RAM and 30 gig of mSATA, so it was like up-to-date kind of stuff. And because it was it supported VT, so in the future I could spin up my own VMs on there. So I gave Andy a gigabit bricks in a bag at a conference, and their engineers went off and installed it. And then the same conference, they swapped out the Belfast Pi for another bricks. So now at this point I was up to like 11 nodes, and had another VM from my friend Thomas Greer at TS1 in London, and then an offer to host one in Bahrain, which is good. Not sure how I'm going to get it there. So this is kind of some of the fun that I've had along the way since October. I was often the first BGP customer for some of these low-end talk advertisers. There was a little bit of education involved sometimes, because they turn up the BGP session and they didn't have any preference set on their routers, so they see the route coming in from their transit and they prefer that over their customer routes. And I was like, oh, epic fail. So in some cases they'd send me their config and then I'd edit it and email it back to them. And some of these people didn't have BGP communities, which was a nightmare as well, because I couldn't do any traffic engineering, like say, don't advertise that to level 3 or double prefix to NTT. And so helping out some of the people I met along the way and getting communities implemented. One of the other tools that was really helpful was the Right Atlas project. Had a couple of them at home anyway, so I started scheduling measurements to look at latency from different regions, and then also querying the Chaos ID record and pushing that back into RethinkDB, so I could try and work out stats if my routing was screwed up or not. So advise everybody to play with that project. That's really cool. And then just sometimes sat there going, oh, it's still kind of under budget. Can I get some more VMs? So some of these companies cropped up. There's this Port Lane. They're based up in Sweden. They offer VPSs. So at the top left, there's like some adverts on their site. They have a €12 a month VPS. And then actually listed on their site, they say you can have a BGP session for €10 a month extra. I haven't bitten the bullet and gotten those yet, because I think that's a bit expensive for my needs at the moment. That's like €20 a month. But I think I can do better than that. And then again, there's Zetagrid. They're in Australia. Their VM starts at 27 Australian dollars. I'm not sure what the conversion rate is, but again, that was kind of higher than I wanted to go. But they offered the BGP service for free, and I was like, not even a setup cost. So then I started poking around on the BGP the HENet site, and I wanted to kind of find out that other people and see how some of these Anycast companies had actually deployed things, and because I'd see people offering an Anycast service on low-end talk, and I was intrigued. So I'd see a lot of the space wasn't actually assigned on RIPE to like a legal entity. It was often in people's personal names. So I kind of knew it was like their side project. So these were some of the kind of interesting deployment mechanisms the ways people's routing that I've come across. I'd often see like a shared /24. So the Anycast company would have a /24 that they'd use, and they'd offer people a dedicated IP on there to other hosting companies, and they give you custom forward and reverse DNS, and they do the slave zones on a single box. And that seemed kind of sane. That's what I was doing, so I didn't think anything of it. And then I'd also see some of these Anycast operations offering hosted 24, where another hosting company would take a /24 out of like their RIPE or ARIN range, and then the Anycast would announce it for them and serve the queries off the edge, off those boxes around the network. The other one that I found a bit curious was some of the Anycast companies with their /24 that they were using. They'd offer /32 routes within that GRE tunneled back to the hosting company. So it gave the illusion that the hosting company was doing Anycast, because you'd see the prefix everywhere, but really they were just GRE tunnels back to like their normal DNS server. So I was kind of scratching my head, what was the advantage of this? And then the one that I found really illuminating was that some people, they only ever had a single /24. That was everything. That was their whole network. That was their management and their Anycast network. And but they wanted to do Anycast. So they just advertised the same /24 everywhere. So they had their mail server in there. They probably had their Exchange environment. And they advertised on a whole bunch of VMs. And on those VMs, they'd answer the DNS authoritative queries on the VM. But the rest of the space, they tunnel back via OpenVPN or IPIP or GRE to their other network, to some hosts. And this was a bit of a head scratcher, but I guess needs must sometimes. And one of the things that I was curious about was that not all of these small bedroom Anycast operations actually host the zone at the edge. And like I said earlier, some host the zone centrally and just cache at the edge, giving the illusion that the queries are being answered from there. And many tunnel the DNS back to a single location. It looks like Anycast. you can ping the IP and the responses are quick, but when you actually query, it's going down some dirty GRE tunnel. So yeah, it's kind of interesting, like how people could quickly spin up these kind of operations. So I wanted to play, like I'd seen all this Cloudflare stuff and other people talking about using HTTP over Anycast. So I wanted to offer like a simple service just so I could debug things. So I set up these two host names, local.sl.com and a 4 and a 6. I deployed like HTTPD onto all the nodes, just via Puppet, but served out a little JSON file from each one. So you could curl it and it would reply telling you where you were getting served from. So what next for this little project? I want to try and keep honest and not turn into one of those people that just GRE tunnels everything back. So I want to keep hosting all these zones for friends and people at the edge. I need to finish off my API and my web interface and then push more code up to GitHub. I want to support multi-master. It should just be changing like a single attribute in the JSON to an array and then adding that back into the config files. I want to support tsig inbound from people that I'm hosting zones for and slaving off. And then I think I need a public SOA checker so you can type the domain in and it will tell you the SOA serial off all the edge nodes. And then I want to mix it up a bit. So again, in the definition for the node in the database, I want to have an attribute where you can flip it to say this node should be running NOT and this node should be running NST4, or we run Bird here instead of Quagga, and then just have the configs just generated dynamically from the database, so I don't need to worry about what's at the edge. Also, some people they'd offer me full table, and then talking to friends, they're like, oh, it'd be interesting to see the full table from India. So my plan is to take MRT dumps and put them somewhere and give them to trusted people, and maybe use Bird for that, so I don't need to actually have all the roots in the kernel because I haven't got much space. I've got like 512 mega or a gig in some places, and then I want to use a crypto file system on the nodes because I don't trust somebody's not mounting my file system. I need to fix my v6 routing because I only peer with HE in West Coast US, and that means like people that get their free transit over there I export in Europe normally go out that way. I need to find more friendly hosts Eastern Europe, get some transit in West Coast, and ideally I want to find someone in Wales that can offer a VM. So at the moment, our kind of running costs are $480 a year, which is kind of within budget and good. Are there any questions?
I want to say I think this is very cool. It sounds like your approach won't scale because it took a lot of your personal relationships to make it happen.
Yeah.
So this isn't exactly a how-to presentation, but it's still very impressive. The point I'd like to make sure does not get lost is that BGP-speaking virtual host providers that want to do VPS are of far greater interest to criminals who want to steal address space and spam from it. And so you're in some bad company in some way.
So to answer that, the thing I found was that some of these organizations, they wouldn't even ask for like an LOA or want to query RIPE. They just I just send them an email, I put a ticket, and one of them didn't even have any filters. I don't think this isn't like a commercial operation, but it was interesting to see that how quickly someone would just accept that you had this prefix and start routing it, and they'd send the notification to their transit providers who wouldn't even check the RIPE database, because in some cases I'd never updated my Ortnum before I set the pairing sessions up.
Jared?
Hi.
Yeah, Jared Mach, NTT.
Hi.
I can probably get you a machine on the West Coast in the US.
Cool. Thank you.
As long as you'll secondary a few domains for me.
I've got, you can have sudo on it, that's fine. Are there any other questions?
So John Heidemann, USCISI. So it's a very impressive dollar per year figure. Can you characterize, if we put some nominal cost on your time, how much time it took you to educate people about BGP?
I probably spent maybe building this. I probably spent like I don't know, maybe 50 hours or something. It's just sat on the sofa, like we watch Downton Abbey and gossip, and then I'll fiddle on this on the laptop. It's not. I'm not kind of stopping my consultancy gig or stopping doing work for Cumulus to do it. It's just in between things.
Anand?
Hi, this is Anand from the RIPE NCC.
Hello.
Very, very nice project. Just a quick question. How many zones are you hosting now, and what are your query rates like?
Okay, so I'm hosting just over 1,000 zones at the moment, and query rates just over. I think I sometimes get over about 20 queries a second across like the whole thing. I'm going to make my my collector instance. I'm planning to kind of make it public so everyone can just have a nose. So that's the kind of one of the reasons for this was like get some stuff up on GitHub and try and play with these new things like XBGP and stuff and share what I'm doing. Hey.
Did you end up trying NOT
Sorry?
on Raspberry Pi?
Sorry?
Did you end up trying the DNS software NOT on the Raspberry Pi?
No, at that point I'd kind of broken everything when the Power DNS was gone, and I knew that Bind had worked on there because I'd ran Bind on the Raspberry Pi before. So I need to go back and revisit the Raspberry Pi project and look at Power DNS why didn't that work, and then try NOT on there.
I was able to get with the same Raspberry Pi configuration about 1,000 queries per second by using the Ubuntu.
Yeah.
And Ubuntu fork for Raspberry Pi and NOT.
Okay. I'll give it a go.
Yes.
The other thing I'm really keen to try is these new ARM boards that are coming out that look like Raspberry Pi, that's like Banana Pi, and they're dual core or quad core in the same form factor.
I'm using this one.
Ah, okay.
It has Wi-Fi,
Yeah.
USB powered, double USB powered, and also Wi-Fi I'm using for management and Ethernet port for peer-peering in the exchange.
Turn it into an Anycast server.
Yeah.
One more question over here.
Yeah, Carsten Schiefner, DNSSEC. So I understand that you, turned yourself into some kind of an Anycast service provider right now.
Yeah.
Just for friends and family. And so my question is not so much technically related, but what's your intention to drive that to? I mean,
just let's people
like
off.
if you think about say mid to long term, say.
I'd like more people to have root access on there, and that's one of the reasons for putting everything in GitHub. Put the Puppet manifest in there and see where it goes. It's an interesting platform to have access to.
Okay, thanks.
It's just a side project. Cool. Thanks.
Any other questions? No? Thank you very much, Nat, for your time. All right, our next presentation is from Microsoft for support on Windows 2008, no, 2012. There you go.
Oh, yeah. So, this is actually not the right presentation.
That's the one that was uploaded where we can check.
So let's roll with it. This will actually be easier than I thought. So, thank you. It's end of the day. Everybody's starting to feel a little bit of jet lag, including myself, because about half the crowd's probably from not this time zone. And then a Windows guy gets up here to talk about Microsoft's platform to this crowd. It's going to be a tough 30 minutes. So the irony here doesn't stop. I'm not actually a Windows guy. I do work for Microsoft. Been there for about 2.5 years right now. And in that time, I've been running medical class software for medical class services across Microsoft's production environment, so the online services group, now called Cloud and Enterprise. The services that I focus on, DNS, Windows, Active Directory, PKI, Mail Relay, and a few others. The plan was to have a conversation about the platform and our implementation of DNSSEC, and I'm going to try to stick to that as much as possible on this this presentation. Kumar Ashutosh, who I am not, is from the product group and was going to be here to talk about some of the details. So I'll try to cover as much as I can.
Do you want me to download the new slides?
Can you real quick?
Take 5 seconds.
5 seconds. All right, I'll vamp.
Please count.
2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, I'm ready. Yeah, on my defense, I have to say the slides were replaced at some point during the day.
Perfect. Much better. So actually, most of my career has been spent in an operating system other than Microsoft's platform. I have been with Microsoft now for 2.5 years, like I mentioned, and that is actually the longest I've run the Microsoft platform for these kinds of services. So it's been an interesting journey over the last couple of years. The opportunity for me coming to Microsoft was to be able to work directly with the development team and try and improve some things. We'll put it like that. So the presentation, which my thing's not working, is really going to be focused on what does the platform have to offer. It will be kind of salesy. I try to keep that down as much as possible. And then focus on really what the platform is intended to do, which is really around the enterprise. Now, unfortunately for me, I have to run this in production at a pretty serious scale. So we've had to make some improvements along the way, and most of that's really been enabled through the Windows Server 2012 operating system. I'll talk about that in just a minute. So the agenda is real simple. 4 things I want to focus on: the overview of what DNSSEC implementation is in Microsoft, the deployment and operations capabilities of it, and then a couple of things that are new. So the basic idea, of course, DNSSEC is not going to solve all the world's problems. We have added a few record types. We're really only guaranteeing with the DNSSEC implementation that the answer that you get back is something that you can trust. It's the basic premise behind it. It was supported in Windows 2008, back when things were just a little bit less well-defined. Our implementation really was fairly basic and rudimentary. It offered the ability to support Windows, DNSSEC rather, but everything was offline. You had to load the zones. You could host them, validate, and there was really only support for NSEC at the time. So with Server 2012, the development team went back to the drawing board and tried to figure out how do we go about trying to solve some of the gaps that we had. It was also an opportunity to reconfigure the entire operating system. But the focus here was really around DNS, and there's a team that's dedicated to just the DNS stack. So interoperability, of course, they wanted to make sure that they were focused on the latest RFCs. They brought everything forward. We have all the latest signing algorithms, automated trust, anchor, rollover support, and of course third-party key management support. So you can offload some of the responsibility if you need. Dynamic, we happen to have this Active Directory thing, so we should probably try to figure out how to take advantage of it. Gives us a bunch of additional features and flexibility and lowers the cost of operations down. And also, since we are going through this process, rolling out a new operating system, is to figure out how do we improve the DNS.exe, since it was not as performant as I think most people would like it to be. Manageability, it wouldn't be Microsoft if we didn't have a wizard. So of course we had to make it really easy and try to figure out how to drive down some of that cost of operations as well. And of course automation. We wanted to make sure that everything was capable of being done in either the automation that's given by Active Directory and enabled by Active Directory, and also through PowerShell scripts and commandlets that would give near one-to-one parity with the DNS console. So all of this starts with the first Windows 2012 server that's introduced. That extends the schema in the directory, gives you the capability. Obviously with the Windows platform, we have the ability to do multi-master. And in this scenario, I've got 5 servers here running a single zone. Signing the zone is pretty straightforward. There's a DNS manager that walks you through. It's a wizard in the signing process, and it's literally 3 clicks and you're done if you take the defaults on the way through. It gives you the ability also to tap into all the configuration that you would ever want for the zone signing key, the KSK, etc., so that you can have full control over the DNSSEC deployment if you decide to go down that route. One of the other cool features, and unfortunately I won't be able to do the demo that I have here later on, is the ability to clone another zone. So if you've already gone through the process of configuration, you have something other than the defaults for some reason, you can just simply take that wizard pointed at the zone that you already have configured, and it'll just assume all of those configurations. So with the first one, you sign it, you tap into the DNS console, you'll go in and set up the configuration for the first zone signing, and it assumes the role of key master, which I'll deal with in just a second. The keys get generated for that first zone, and then it signs the copy of the zone for itself. Now the key master is a specific role that's focused on all of the automation responsibilities thereafter. So all of the key management and key rollover happens from the key master's role. The administrator has to do a few things, which I'll talk about later, if you decide to work outside of the construct of Active Directory. But we do have full support for that as well. So once you have that first zone signed, of course, the rest of the hosts that are in the authoritative zone have not had that updated. They have to go through that signing process themselves. So the first thing that happens is Active Directory kicks in, takes the keys, the private keys, and then replicates that throughout Active Directory. After which, each one of the hosts will then go through a signing process themselves and sign each one of the records within the zone. And that's basically it. You're done. That zone is now complete. Now there is one actual thing that has to happen before that, which is the trust anchors, and I'll get to that in a minute as well, before you start actually validating. Updating the zone data is pretty trivial as well. So in this case, I have a single client that comes in on a dynamic zone. He automatically talks to the first DNS server that will respond to him, and that server then takes the record, adds it, and then signs it. It will then pass that record around to the rest of the zone servers, the authoritative servers, and then each one of them will then go through the signing process and update the record. So the whole point is to minimize the amount of data that's transferred across the network and allow each server to focus on the signing process themselves. This would be my demo. The demo, just to save you the anxiety, is actually pretty quick. It's literally 3 quick clicks and you're done with zone signing. But I was going to also walk you through the configuration, which is actually pretty decent. So if anyone is interested in that, come see me afterwards and we can walk through that. So let me get back into the trust anchor distribution. This is absolutely part of the cool factor. If you are in a fully AD infrastructure, then of course this gets really easy. Active Directory takes care of all of the automation for you, focuses on all the permissions and trust management for you. You can just allow AD to take care of things like trust anchors and all of the key rollover. If you are not, or if you're using fileback, which we have full support for, then it's a manual process. Or you can use the wizard again, or a better way, of course, is by focusing in on PowerShell and using PowerShell to script that. Trust anchor maintenance, of course, gives us all the benefits of being able to update automatically if we're using the Active Directory on that back end. The key rollover process is also pretty straightforward. In this case, I've got Contoso up here. It's zone signed through its KSK, and everything is working fine for us. But when we do the first implementation of the zone signing, it actually generates 2 keys, parks those in Active Directory. With that, when the first key starts to expire, I've already got the second key in the directory. It's replicated, and everybody is good with that. We wait for any references to the first zone key to expire, and then go ahead and kick it away. Sorry, I'm totally blowing my walkthrough here. And then at every point, we always have at least 2 zone keys in the zone, so that we're never we're never coming up against that timeout period. If you're not using the Active Directory, then this is something that you'd have to work through with PowerShell. So do keep that in mind. So the key maintenance is low TCO. This helps definitely in a fully Active Directory integrated zones, but obviously going up, working with COM.org, etc., you'd have to work through that separately. So all this does come with a bit of a performance cost, so let's get that out of the way. Right here I've highlighted the default, which is a 1024-bit RSA-256 with INSEC3. The cost along the left axis over here for that is about 225 signs per second, or nodes per second, that we can sign. And the scaling factor right here is in a memory scaler. So about 3 times the memory would be required to be able to support that kind of infrastructure. Obviously down here at 4096-bit, our performance drops off fairly significantly, anywhere from about 6 to maybe 10 nodes per second is about all we can do. And of course, as the key size goes up, the memory consumption goes up dramatically as well. Now, as I mentioned, one of the things that we wanted to improve was the server performance, DNSSEC performance. Now, in this particular instance, this is single host running on a quad core with 32 gigs of RAM on a VM in Hyper-V, doing about 4 nines at 75,000 QPS, and starts to taper off. We're still doing fairly decent at 120, but your availability starts to become an issue above that. Something I think that we still have some room to improve. So new for Server 2012, IP address management was built in, PowerShell command lines with near parity to the command line, in command line for the command tool. One of the biggest requests was dynamic reordering of forwarders. Pretty significant problem for Microsoft clients. So now the server is keeping track. As a forwarder stops resolving, it will stop forwarding that on. It will drop it to the bottom of the stack. This helps quite a bit. And of course, it wouldn't be a Microsoft presentation without talking about wins. It just won't go away. So there is full DNSSEC support in wins, believe it or not, and definitely something that hopefully we can put to rest at some time in the very near future. Certainly we are at Microsoft. So in summary, easy to deploy. Couldn't get too much easier than this. Most of our customers, of course, we're focused on the enterprise, are going to be focused on just signing whatever they have to, taking the defaults on the way through. The automated management helps to improve that TCO for keeping the service running. We're standards compliant, and I would say we have reasonably decent performance. Questions?
Hi, Shane Curtine. A question about your signing. You say that you distribute the keys across all of the members of the Active Directory,
yep,
and then each signs independently. Does that result in different signatures for each server?
No.
So you synchronize the time that they all
because they're
use?
signed against the same KSK.
Yeah, but there's also a time element, right? So if one happens to sign a record at a different second or something like that, you'll get different signatures. Is that something that you
That sounds right. So I haven't tried that, so
okay.
I don't know.
It shouldn't be a problem for any clients, but I think as a DNS purist, which I'm not, that might annoy you. And the second question is, do you have any plans to flip the switch and someday default to signing?
Oh, that's a great question. So no would be the probably short answer. Certainly at Microsoft, we do work with various government institutions that are putting pressure on us to move to DNSSEC, so we're going to have to do that at least for some zones. We run many tens of thousands of zones, some of which are going to have to be DNSSEC enabled. So that work is in flight right now.
Hold on, Mehmet wants to follow up on your question.
Quick answer. The validation, within the software development side and enabling side, let's say you have a resolver and it's on the roadmap to be by default enabled and users. I think that was the question, right?
Well, I was actually asking about the signing. But
okay.
Resolver is also.
Yes, validation part is also in the roadmap for being considered to enable by default by just simply getting the KSK key. It's not with our operations, so I want to make it very clear. It's the software side of the things. So when a user deploys this, they won't need to go to enable, but rather they will need to go disable. The other thing is, I believe your first question was regarding multi-master setup. In multi-master, when a zone is being signed, the other multi-master locks it, so it doesn't get signed and synchronized. Let's say you have A server and B server. When A server is signing, B is locked, and then through Active Directory, that key is being synchronized in the back end.
So only one sign?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Sorry. And the other thing is, we didn't have a chance to see the actual demo, but demo has some default value. So someone that has never signed before, without making any changes, step by step, they can get everything signed, and everything is RFC standards. IPAM solution that David mentioned, it also covers the reserve zones automatically signed when enabled. So it's a full integration of both ends. Sorry.
Jared?
Jared Mach, Open Resolver Project. So Microsoft in the past has made it, or it's been impossible to disable open recursion on its DNS server platform. Has that been improved in this version, such that you can provide recursive service to the internal clients and refuse external queries?
Yes, sorry, I spent India 2 months for this. So Windows 2012 R2 has a limitation where you can say restrict to these clients. So you can say these are the subnets that you need to provide recursive answers to.
And by default it returns refused?
Yes. Windows 2012 R2, I want to specify that, not 2008.
Yeah. Jim?
Jim Reeds. I'm not sure what you're doing about key management and what hooks do you have for key policies around key management in the system. For example, rotating a zone signing key, let's say at a monthly interval, or revoking a key. What kind of mechanisms have you got in place for that, or is that something else that's still to come in the roadmap?
Sorry, can you repeat?
I'll try speaking in English. What hooks do you have in this platform for policy issues around key management? For example, expressing something that says this zone signing key must be changed every 3 months. This key signing key must be changed once a year. The key must be a particular size. How do you do about revoking a particular key or planning a rollover so you double sign things with the new key before the old key is finally pulled out?
Sure. So all of that is set up when you sign the original zone. So you make all of those decisions at the outset. To my knowledge, there's no way to manage that through GPO or to change it later. You would have to re-sign the zone. So you have full control over the zone at the time when you're signing. So you can configure, TTL, interval, rollover time, length, all of that. Yeah, it's quite comprehensive.
Also RFC compliant. So
yeah,
the things that are not mentioned in RFC, we are usually going with the best current operational practice examples, but you actually are able to set that up and change it during the setup.
Robert Nagy, Deep Dive Networking. I thought I understood, and now I'm confused. So can we go back to the key master?
Yeah.
So key master gets the key. We're using AD replication. Since we know that has timing issues, I'll ignore the clock part, but when the key master has signed the zone and it now has the signed copy, where's the timing with AD replication here? When do they all start serving the signed version of the zone?
Sure.
And where does the signing happen now on each individual
Sure.
DNS server not. Now I'm confused from the clarification, sorry.
Okay, the zone key is, the zone signing key is signed on each individual server. Now, I was not aware of the locking that Mehmet was talking about, so actually that provokes a bunch of questions I need to go talk to Mehmet about. But the AD replication is 15 minutes typically in most environments. It certainly is in mine, and mine is enormous.
So at the point, sorry to labor the point, so at the point where we say, yes, we're going to sign this, we have a potential 15-minute wait before it's moved around.
Yep,
so,
standard replication.
Okay, and that's just for the signing of the key.
That's right.
So we're going to wait till everybody is prepared and everybody is ready, and then we can begin to serve the signed zone.
That's right. So it will not actually start to do validation until you add the trust anchor, right? So each one of the servers, the non-auth servers that are responding, need to have the trust anchor in place. That's effectively the on switch for DNSSEC.
And also, this only is the case when multi-master setup is enabled. So if you have a single master, it's not the case. It's much more fast.
All right. Any other questions? It seems no.
Yeah, so any other questions, feel free to follow up with me, david.cates@microsoft.com, or dns@microsoft.com.
One last question.
Sorry, this is quick, but this sounds like an ideal platform to sign Microsoft.com now.
Yes, coming soon. Yes. Hold that thought. All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David. Yeah, I wanted to note as a PC chair that the last presentation from Microsoft about DNSSEC stuff was back in 2006 in the DNS OARC workshop at Redmond, at Microsoft headquarters. So after 8 years, it's good to hear an update. Hopefully, we don't have to wait another 8 years for another update. Yeah, but thanks, David, for covering up the presentation and also for dealing with this tough crowd. Not easy to stand up in there. All right. So our last presentation for today is from Casey Deccio from VeriSign regarding portable DNS analysis.
All right, thank you. Well, so I've talked a little bit about monitoring in the past and DNS analysis. This is kind of a continuation of this, and this actually stems, initially this idea stems from some history, and I'll give you that because it started at a DNS OARC meeting a few years ago. So I have this notion of when I started DNS Viz for monitoring and for analysis, this idea where you have this polar or analysis engine that sits at a single location, it goes out to authoritative servers, and then from the queries that it, or the responses from its queries, it sends those then to a database, an SQL database, with just meta information that it got. And then only from there would you get the visual representation where you'd get the graph and so forth. So a couple things to note here is you had to go to the database first. Okay, that's just the way it was, and then the output was, you know, the visual output to the web, and then the meta information and also the fact that I was overwriting previous data. Okay, so a couple things changed in the Generation 2 rewrite. First of all, I was getting full response information for a couple of reasons. Number one, if I got something wrong in my meta information, I couldn't go back and figure out what went wrong. But also, so I could fix the code and reevaluate it, so to speak, and that way I could maintain the historical context of things. But also, I was not only keeping a single snapshot of things, but I'd revise things so that I could keep track of things over time. So if somebody says, hey, you know, this site went down a year ago, then now we've got kind of a permalink to it or something like that. Okay. I also changed to a NoSQL database, which turned out to be a terrible mistake. just because of perhaps my inexperience, I don't know, but anyway, we had the same kind of idea here. But then after the disaster with the NoSQL database, I changed back to an SQL database. Now I've actually still got pieces of data and I think all three systems, and which I'm trying to converge into a single system that is much better than the original, of course. But this all kind of gave me a headache. You know, part of it was understanding what kind of data I needed to keep track of along the way, and also more generally, it's allowed me to take a step back and understand the notion of what I call DNS portability. Okay, and so some of the challenges, you know, I already mentioned the idea of changing things from storage backend to storage backend. But there's also, you know, we've got, and by the way, I'm not trying to enumerate, you know, the endless list of tools that are out there, but here are some of them, for example, that do different types of analysis that we have now. And they don't really interoperate per se. You know, my tool says this and my tool says this, and the good, there's lots of great things about having different perspectives of things, but how do they kind of speak together so you're getting apples and apples and not apples and oranges? Okay, and then also the notion of different vantage points. You know, this one's, we had something a year and a half ago where the different tools said different things, but it turns out that it wasn't the tools, it was the vantage point. They were on different coasts, and there was an Anycast issue. Okay, so those are some of the things that that are kind of bigger picture here. All right, so one of the early things also in understanding this is that there's more to a simple response than just sending a query. Oftentimes when you're doing diagnostics, you want to try different things, and some of the servers will actually do this as well, not all of them, or they'll do it differently. But I have this kind of systematic way where I'll do things, to try certain things to get a response back if I haven't gotten one with just the default, you know, query with eDNS 0 and, you know, a certain UDP max payload size and so forth. So some of the things that you might see are timeouts, or you might get a form error, you might get a bad R code, you know, serve fail and not emperor are examples of that. And then some of the things that you may change along the way to elicit responses are reducing the UDP max payload size. This is often in conjunction with some type of a PMTU issue along the path from where you're querying to where your destination is, and then disabling eDNS is another example, but these aren't the only things. In fact, one other one that I'll mention here, because I don't think I mentioned it later, is if you're querying a validating resolver and you get a serve fail message, then to set the CD flag, and this is purely for diagnostics, I'm not trying to bypass security here just in case anyone's wondering, but when you're trying to diagnose problems, then I would do that so that you can actually get the response from your cache so you can show where the chain breaks. Okay, don't try this at home. All right, so here's kind of one example, and this is courtesy of Stéphane, who helped me out with this a couple years ago. But we were noticing that two of the root servers, apparently, at least according to this visualization, were not returning DS records for .fr, which of course, you know, sets off some alarms like, oh, what's going on? Now, what we did know from this, when we did a little bit further investigation, is that what I was getting back in the response was that two of the servers, which did have a similar path, actually, there was no eDNS in the responses. Now, the problem is I'm doing all these things to kind of downgrade my DNS along the way to elicit a response. And so it was difficult for me. I could say, well, this is what I'm doing. I'm after 2 timeouts, then I reduced the UDP max payload size, and then after 2 more timeouts, then I tried disabling eDNS and so forth. But the problem is there wasn't really any clear way, and I still didn't know along the way what the end problem was. Okay. But the point is, it was hard to know for sure what exactly was going on. And so, you know, I've enumerated several possible causes here. So the servers simply weren't responding with eDNS, or there were middle boxes dropping the eDNS queries, or maybe just the servers were extremely busy at that time, and or the link was busy, and so the probability went up that I had a number of timeouts that seemed to align with the time when I started removing eDNS. But the simple answer is I simply don't know. Okay, so going back to this idea of portable DNS query responses. Okay, so we have this simple, here's what I started out with, which is great, except what did you change along the way? Okay, so here are the kind of desired requirements that I would say that go along with a portable DNS response. So first of all, you have your initial request options, so your flags, your eDNS specific variables, okay, your version, UDP max payload, flags and options, and then whether or not it starts out as TCP, which usually no is the case because we're doing standard, try UDP first, but for some reason if you might force TCP first, and if John has his way, then we'll all be doing TCP first, so okay, but anyway, and then you have, along with that information, you not only have the message itself, but you have a history of responses and the changes to your initial request options, okay? And then initially I have this idea where the representation is JSON, but that's somewhat arbitrary. Okay, so here's one example. I don't expect you to kind of read all this, but the idea is for example.com, you've got your typical information up here, your flags, eDNS version, etc. And then you see I have responses on here because here's the server and here's the client that it came from. So you might actually be querying from multiple places, and so I made the possibility for aggregation where you'd actually add in something else. But the point is here you have this information. Okay, and it looks, it's fairly straightforward. You have this message, which is the wire message itself. In this case, it's base 64 encoded. And you may ask, by the way, well, if you're doing this, going through all this trouble with JSON, why didn't you just make it also kind of representable and break the sections up, for example? Well, that's not my point in doing the diagnostics. This is the kind of portable part of it, not the presentation part of it. And I'll get to that a little bit later. Okay. So let's see. So serialized query response. This is an example where I have the different timeouts, and so you see this notion of history down in the lower left. Okay. So in addition to the other things, you see this response time. Okay, that's the total, that's the response time of the last try. Then you see in this history that a few things were tried in order. First time it tried the query, it got, after 3 seconds, it timed out. There was no change, and then it timed out again on the second one in the upper right-hand corner here with 3 seconds. Okay, and this time we tried changing the UDP max payload to 512. And then we had another timeout with no additional change, and then finally another timeout in the history here where we disabled DNS, and the ultimate result is back here on the left-hand side again where we have the timeout, which is kind of the main part of the message. Okay, so that's another example of this. Okay, and there are some options that go along with this. So this is kind of going back to my notion of having the wire message in there. Well, you can make this a little bit more compressible if you're taking multiple queries from multiple servers. If, for example, you would consider the following. So maintaining the actual query ID, you may or may not want that, and so that would be kind of an option. But if you either derive it somehow on the fly or maintain it as 0, so 0 it out, then you can have the opportunity for compression. Same thing if you were to canonicalize the ordering in the section, or at least make it consistent somehow, okay? And same thing with our data within an RSA. If you don't care about that stuff, then you can just make all those standards, so then you can make it compressed, if you will, when you're including multiple messages. Okay. History detail options, same thing. You might include the full. If you did get some type of a message but it was malformed, you may include that in one of your history examples in that list of history. Maybe just your message size is all you need, or maybe you don't want any of that. You just want the overall outcome. Okay. And then again, I mentioned the trade-offs. You have the option, if you have the entire wire message, just the raw message itself, you can check things like compression. And I'll use this as an example, but I know Bind recently came out with this change that was in theory not backwards incompatible, but it had to do with compression. And I don't know all the details of it, but maybe somebody would, in doing diagnostics, would be able to point to something in a wire message and say, look, this is something that we noticed and we've got the entire thing. So you trade off that level of inspection with something a little higher level. Okay, and of course storage if you're storing all this stuff. Okay, parameterizing DNS requests. Okay, so this is getting into the framework a little bit more of what's going on, but you have this idea of initial options, which I already mentioned most of them, okay, flags, eDNS, TCP, and a timeout value, which you may want to change along the way, increase it, for example. Request handlers, and this is where basically you take in some type of response or error, and then you make a change or not based on what you get. And I'll show you an example of that in the code in just a moment. Okay, but what can we do with this portable query and response now? We can do a little bit more than what I was doing before, where you can take this portable format that you get, okay, complete with its history and everything else, and you can put it into storage still, or you can take it directly from portable format and put it out to the web, or you can share it with somebody else. You can use, put it in multiple formats, okay? You can do it in your JSON output if you wanted some kind of a RESTful API. You can do it in the visual, a lot more options. And then you can pack it up and say, here's what I saw, and send it to some other, you know, analysis tool or something, okay? But the other thing is, it also changes the game in terms of, so you can hit an authority server, you can hit a cache, you can hit a recursive resolver, a validating resolver, and all these are changed with the different, you would change the different options that we're using to get along with those. Okay, there's been some talk over the mailing list, different mailing lists over the years of looking glasses, DNS looking glasses, which I think are a great idea, but have kind of lacked the functionality that I would use them for if I had a DNS looking glass. And so now if we use this type of stuff, then you can actually specify a URL that says, that has this notion of your initial options in your handler, for example, your handlers, what you're going to do with it. But that's even less important than what you end up with, which does have your request options, your response history, and so forth. Okay. So sorry, this is probably terrible, but it was trying to give you an idea of I have just a couple snippets of code to show you kind of how easy. I've tried to make this as a framework because I intend to actually release this and make it usable for folks to install and then, you know, do whatever they want with. Okay, so the handle method of this base class response handler object basically says retry optionally with modified options, or just pass it to the next handler if it doesn't match, or stop immediately and bypass all future handlers. Okay, so an example of that is one that where if you get the TC flag on your response, then you would just try again over TCP. So you've got this, oops. So anyway, you don't have to study the code here, but the idea is if you're getting, if you're getting this, you know, bit set, then you set TCP to true, and then you return this, what I call a DNS query retry attempt that tells you what the reason was and what you tried again. Okay, so you've got this whole history that goes along with it. This is a little bit more complex one, where this is the one that uses the reduce UDP max payload on timeout handler. Okay, but the whole idea behind it, showing you this example, is that you can actually see that you can initialize it with certain options, like you can set your threshold the way you would want to in terms of number of timeouts and what you would want to reduce your payload to. So you could, you know, say, well, first I want to set it to 1,000, and then later I want to set it to 512 with different handlers, for example. Okay, but this one, of course, just sets it to a single one that you would pass in, initializing those things, and then later on you would handle it appropriately by just seeing if the number of timeouts that you have experienced exceeds the threshold that you've set initially. Then there's this notion of what I call a query factory, where you set out your default options that you're going to, you know, your initial request options that you have, and down at the bottom there you have the request handlers that you're going to investigate, or going to use along the way. Okay. And so here's, you know, a couple examples of that, where if you're doing a simple query, you just inherit that and you're good to go. Recursive DNS query, you're adding the RD flag, and then a standard query, you know, these are arbitrary names, but this is what I've chosen. Then you're actually just doing, it inherits from the standard query, but you're adding the TC flag checker, if you will, okay? Okay. So two more quick points. So if you're taking this notion of what I call a portable DNS query and now transforming it into a portable DNS analysis, okay, so if I'm doing example.com, for example, I want not just the name example.com, the query that goes along with that, I want the entire chain of trust that goes along with that. And so of course you're going to include in some type of a structure all the associated queries that go along with that, whether there's CNAMEs involved, MX records, whatever makes sense. Okay, you're going to be somewhat comprehensive in terms of, actually these are options down here that you would make. Maybe you just want to, what I would call at a glance approach, where you have, you know, just a single look at each individual server to make it quick, give you an idea if something's wrong, or you still want the comprehensive analysis, which is what DNSViz does currently. Okay, authoritative versus cache, if you're looking at a cache versus looking at the authoritative installation. Okay, but the cache is kind of cool because that's where the rubber hits the road, right? Sometimes you don't, you know, in the end, it may or may not be the problem, but the cache is where your client is getting it from. Okay, and then you may or may not want the inclusion of delegation boundaries. All right, so future work. So the idea of this notion of portability and the format for doing it is something that I'm looking at to see if it makes sense to be standardized. You know, so you can have this you know, interoperable format. And then also I'm working on releasing the new DNS Viz Generation 4 or 4.5 analysis framework, which can be used not only for the DNS Viz website but also for people to incorporate into their own uses. Okay, questions?
We have Mehmet here in the front. I will let Billy do the running.
Very good presentation. Thank you, Casey. One of the things you mentioned was the looking glass. I think it's a big need, especially when you're troubleshooting large Anycast deployments. And in my previous life, I discovered something called Ring, NLNet, for those who doesn't know it, and I have actively used it to troubleshoot it and find it very useful, and it's free. So I thought it would be worth mentioning. Ring for NLNet.
I'm sorry, I didn't know that one.
Yeah, so basically it is it's a free system where you can provide a virtual box that will get you a membership, and then you can launch dig or whatever Linux commands that you're allowed to from pretty much like couple hundred boxes, you know, boxes in, you know, computer servers around the world. So it helps you, you know, do like a looking glass kind of view.
Great, thank you.
You wanted to do a demo. We have a few minutes.
Yeah, I don't want to. I kind of went back and forth about whether it made sense to do a demo. I mean, this is work in progress stuff, but you can see some of the code. Not the code, sorry. I've already bored you with code. But this is just what it looks like if I'm analyzing .org, for example. And it seems that one of the, it's taking a while here because it's actually timing out on one of the root servers that seems to have limited access from here until I reduce the UDP max payload. So if I'm looking at the history, oops. So right here, well, this one timed out. It's hard to tell why it timed out, which is, but it did. And then no change brought it back. And then, you know, there was another one down here that I saw earlier that timed out twice, and it might be the same one. So yeah, same thing here, and I don't know if that's the same server or not. But anyway, that's some of the raw output, just kind of FYI, not a real fancy demo, but again, kind of a work in progress. So thank you.
Thank you, Casey. Many thanks to the speakers for keeping on track of the time. Just a reminder, for tomorrow we are going to have a PGP key signing session after the at the end of the lunch break. So if you want to participate, send me your keys. I already got like 12 of them. So yeah, if you want to participate, don't forget your keys and don't forget your IDs.
Okay, we're nearly done. It's almost beer o'clock. So, what's next? Next thing up is a social event. So it is at the, it's like 3 minutes walk. So basically go out the hotel, turn right, turn left, turn right, and it's basically on the right. I'd just like to thank NZRS and Dine for sponsoring the social this evening. And basically, once again, thank our main meeting sponsors, VeriSign and Microsoft, and thank all our speakers today. We restart at 9 a.m. tomorrow, so you may wish to consider that in your consumption this evening. Basically, the way this social works is that there are 3 drinks per attendee, and there is a buffet for food. So Mehmet wants to say something briefly.
I might actually leave for some emergency funeral, and if I'm not here, somebody who needs to be clapped is staying right next to me. He puts this conference together and really bothers us, asks us things. Not bother, but you know, I want to make sure that he's acknowledged, and he's the result, as well as Sebastian.
Thank you, Mehmet. Thank you also to Dinesh and William and everyone behind the scenes that's made this happen. Right, before you get to go to the beer, there's more than just beer this evening. In fact, there's more than just the Eurovision Song Contest this evening. We have something better. We have Joe's quiz.
Installing device driver.
Yeah, it's Windows 7.
All your secrets belong to me now.
Quiz.dll.
Keith, is the social straight away or at 7? I thought it was later.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sorry, I'm just trying to get this. Sorry, yes, 7 p.m. to 9:30. And I'm not quite sure what the beer and food order is in there, but presumably there will be beer and then there'll be food and then there will be beer and then there will be beer. But yeah, so they're expecting us around 7 p.m.
All right. In stark contrast to the well-planned nature of the rest of the event, what do I press space? There we go. Here are the rules that I just made up 4 minutes ago. I say judges all the way through because I hope to have a co-judge. We'll find out what's going to happen there. But yeah, 1 of 4 people, or something else if you want. Yeah, so there we go. That's the rules. Oh, how do I go back? There we go. That's actually what I mean. Yes. I started off by saying 0 or more people, because I thought that was more general. In fact, whatever teams you want are fine. But if we have the whole room being one team, then having a team makes no sense. But since there are no prizes anyway, that's probably fine. We could do that. Half people, yes. Half people are probably going to be penalized. This rule here is very important. Even if you get the answer wrong, there are ways to get points. So bear that in mind. Right, so Roy Aarons volunteered his full set of questions, which he has not sent. So if you have ideas about cunning things that nobody else will be able to answer, feel free to send those in. Fantastic, so there we go. The idea here is to probably do a short 30-minute sort of quiz, so that if it turns out to be really painful, it's only 30 minutes. If it turns out to be really fun, then we can make up more questions on the fly. That's fine too. And yes, fresh liver. There are pencils on the desks in front of you for those 5 people who are sitting at desks. It would amplify the sort of the smoothness of the logistics. Oh, there's more pens and pencils over here. So bring paper and pencils just in case we can't manage to bring our own. And I think that's it. Yes, that's it. So there you go. We will be scheduled to start as soon as we decide we have some questions and people show up. So at some point. So is that all clear? Okay, good. Thank you very much.
That's the end of today. Thank you. See you later. Don't worry about it.